Like, we've been sitting here for probably close to an hour talking about a million other things, and it's just like, okay, let's just get this going. So I'm glad you're back, and you're coming with toys, and
that's a good word for them.
I was like, you know what? I don't even know what to expect today. So let's just hit the ground running. We were just talking about how you make your own body armor, which is freaking interesting. I'd be very interested to hear about that. But let's talk about how do you want to start off? How do you want to start this off? Do you want to go and just jump into specific things?
Man, just jump in, man. We've been having a great time and we can carry it on. It's my favorite kinds of conversations. Okay. It's just like what we had last time. We don't need to have anything bullet pointed, but right. There's a reason I brought some props today. You know, like I want to bring to me, some of my favorite things on the entire earth, which are weapons of mass destruction, books and blades and bullets, And
there goes the YouTube channel.
Oh no, bro.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Hold on, real clear. You see what I did there?
Yeah.
I have a video that's called How to Make Weapons of Mass Destruction on my YouTube channel. Enjoy it. And anyways, I teach people how to make these shofars, which have wrecked kingdoms.
Awesome.
Super savagely. You ever heard about Ehud? Crazy assassin, left-handed assassin that made his own blade and killed a king and left the dagger inside his abdomen. You ever heard this story?
No.
Crazy stuff.
We're jumping into it. Talk to me.
You want to hear this story?
Yeah, I want to hear about it.
Why does nobody tell these awesome stories?
Well, that's what you're here
for. There's this crazy character. His name's Ehud, right? This happens way back in the days of the Moabites, ancient history. Because it's important to understand history. A lot of people are totally lost in the contemporary news cycle, and they forget that everything that's happening now has already happened before. And it's good to be an examiner of history, so you're not bound by the same cycles to repeat it. But anyways, I digress. There's this crazy little slave kingdom that's just being buried, Israel, just being pummeled by these people, taken captive by them. And they've got all these tyrants ruling over them, named Eglon, King Eglon. This is where everyone boos, that guy. Because what he's doing is he's sending in raiding parties into the people's lands, and they're just plummeting and taking everything. And the people are crying out, like everybody right now today, just in bondage and despair. They're like, we're being taxed at 60%. We can't afford to eat groceries anymore. You know how everybody feels right now, dude. They're ready to throw their head through a building, and they're looking for somebody to save them. It's a dangerous position. It's a dangerous time. But anyways, the people are crying out, and they do the right thing, which is to cast off the idols, fundamentals, get rid of all the strongholds that are tearing down your life and your family and all the stuff that's ruining you, And they're like, we want to be better. Please help us. And they start crying out to Yahuwah, like, help us, please. So he raises up a left-handed man named Ehud. Now, it's an interesting thing because Ehud is a no-name buddy. He just pops up in the story. He's the third judge of Israel at the time in this historical event. And he's left-handed. So by de facto, generally, you're not allowed to serve in the military. Generally, everything is catered and designed and cultivated societally to protect people from ever being that guy. And so he ends up, the Spirit comes upon him mightily in power, which is fundamental, and it makes him make a knife. A double-bladed one, about a cubit in length, like this. This is a Xiphos, right? This is one of my absolute favorites. This is a Cobra steel, by the way. These are made for use. These aren't just cute little things you see on the infomercials. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, and I put this ridiculous edge on it, so it's way more effective. But he makes a double-edged thing. Now, understand something fundamentally. Double edges have one real job, which is not agricultural use, which is not very fundamental for chopping meat at your home table and your dining room table. This is for cutting flesh in a recurved blade shape. Very, very important. Strategic design. Anyways, he takes this cubit-shaped blade and he straps it to his inner thigh, because that's what sneaky blades people do. They tuck it away in the innermost thigh so that you can't see it. And then he goes to the king and he's like, hey, king, I've got all these presents for you. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, he raised up an entire army and he called all the people with the shofar.
Weapon of mass destruction.
So he goes in with two weapons, okay? One super sneaky, one that everybody's used to seeing. And they're like, yeah, it's another little ram's horn. Who the heck cares? Anyways, he takes those two weapons with him and he goes in with an entourage of bringing gifts. And right, this is how it's sneaky. People can bring you gifts and then they make your heart turn away from justice. And this is a problem with corruption and everything else that starts to plague politicians and plague kings, is that they get reciprocity in there from their corporate sponsors who are like, you know what? I know I gave you $50 million to your APAC. I expect it paid back in full. Mm-hmm. So it happens. Well, anyways, he's all beguiled by this king and he's sitting there. He's like, I got a secret message for you, king. And he's like, I want to hear a secret message. Don't tell anybody here. Take it back to my suite. So they go back to the palace. They hang out in the doors. They close the doors. They're completely alone. And Ehud leans in to tell him the word from Yahuwah. And as he leans in, he draws that blade from its secret place and he runs it through his abdomen right up into the aorta. and the blade is lost inside him because he was a very fat man. The blade is lost inside him, and he falls down dead. And Ehud makes his sweet escape. He goes out the balcony window. He runs out of the area. He gets his shofar. Let's see. And then all the Israelite army come and attack. It's the same moment they find the king dead in his upper chamber. And they're all like, totally filled with fear. This is psychological warfare at its finest, and clandestine operators just killing it. And that's exactly what happens. They come in, they completely annihilate the army, and they take back the land, and there's peace established in the land for a generation. It's a beautiful story.
Absolutely.
And you know what? Nobody told me that in Bible school ever. I'm like, what the heck? They bored me with the Bible my entire life. You know, I had to go read it for myself to find out what was actually in there. And I found all these crazy, awesome stories that vindicated my life and gave me purpose and meaning for this ridiculous lifestyle that I lived.
Yeah, like the militant Bible.
Yeah,
you know?
bro. It's so
the militant
savage.
aspects.
Oh, yeah, man. I was like reading Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, just on rinse and repeat over and over again. I'm like, why? I want to be Samson so bad.
I know.
I want to be Samson so bad.
Like I remember the first time I discovered the David's Mighty Men.
Gibberim.
I think I was probably about 15 years out of Bible college or something. I mean, I had no idea. And then I was just reading and I was like, what is this? I was like, these are like X-Men, you know?
Dude,
I was like, these are super soldiers, like legit.
You betcha,
It was wild.
You bet.
And then there's the concept that some people believe that in David's ranks might have been switched team Nephilim operating with him.
Dang right.
What do you think about that?
You betcha, son.
Yeah.
You bet, man. See, there's an importance in understanding etymology of names because you can start to trace lineage. And some of these guys' names are straight up like the lion-faced men of Moab. Understand that, like, when you start to read their specific okay, for any of you who've never familiar with this and you don't know what we're talking about, there are hybrids, chimeras, for certain, and some of them express something that makes their face like a lion. And there's been actual recovered skulls of this that have been on display in museums, something that was known for a long time. You can see Assyrian reliefs of them capturing these hybrids and using them as assassin soldiers in their military, chained and necked and being marched into battle to be released like the hellhounds. Anyways, 2 of these guys, hybrids, come over onto David's side. At one point in his journey in the wilderness, when he's on the run from Saul, 2 of those hybrids come over. And as they're approaching, obviously freak show level hybrids showing up. And it said clearly in one of the accounts of the Gibberim, the mighty men of valor, that's a Hebrew word, Gibbor. I have a series called Becoming Gibberim, which was all about this, you know, because there's a guy in there, Benaiah. He's savage. And he become King Solomon assassin later on. He becomes the king over the leader of the army. He's David's like head of his guards. But early on in the story, he's just this guy
dude
who climbs in pits with lions on snowy days and just runs them through. Where's the hide? You know, that guy.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to know Benaiah. But Benaiah also wrestled a giant and killed him with his own weapon, you know. And then there's these other guys that you're like, dude, they fought with a lion-faced man of Moab, a hybrid, and won. And everyone's like,
enough said.
I'll follow that man forever. And they're like, dude, yeah. But you got to remember, David, we don't get the context of it. When King Saul is all pissed off, it's because they're saying he's slaying tens of thousands of people. And King Saul, they're like, he kills thousands. But they're not joking. This isn't some kind of colloquial euphemism. David showed up on the battlefield and tens of thousands of people died. That's a different kind of man. It's a different kind of warrior. And that's one whose renown filled the earth. Everywhere he went, man, every king and every kingdom he showed up in, they're like, he's slain his tens of thousands. They're like, you don't want that man anywhere near you. Smart kings were like, I'd like that man to be my bodyguard.
Well, that's why David actually worked behind enemy lines for a while with the Philistines, you know?
Right.
Like, I mean, they're
Run
like,
and gun.
First they're like, are you playing games with us? And he's like, no, I'm just seeking refuge. Like, okay, you can have this land over here.
You can have Ziklag.
And you do some work for us and, you know, all that. But I mean, it's incredible. So that reminds me of, the idea of when do these things exist today kind of thing, right? And I would love to see a lion-faced man. Maybe I will one day. But I just read recently, I forget where I heard this story, but about this guy named, I think they called him Big Joe here in Tennessee about 100 years ago. And he was about 7'3", 7'4". And the legend has it that, I remember whoever was telling the story, they didn't bring up the idea of, Nephilim, the Native Americans talking about these giants in the land, all that stuff. And then you have like Native American tribes that supposedly were just made up of like 7+ foot people. And they talk about this guy, Big Joe, who I think probably has some kind of lineage like that. But the way they tell the story is that he's just a Tennessee redneck. Just really tall, but apparently he was so strong. Like it was like godlike strength that this guy had. I mean, he could pick up a full-grown boar over his head, like he would lean over a fence, pick it up, and just hang it over his head to go take care of it. He came home with like dozens of bear from a hunting trip to feed his family because his entire family was huge,
hungry.
His smallest son was 6'5", but 360, and so like these were big people. And supposedly he was like known to be just the strongest, toughest guy in Tennessee. And people from other states would travel just to fight Joe, to test their strength. And there was a couple stories, like the one guy, I think from West Virginia, he came all the way down, took one look at Joe and was like, see ya, never mind, I'm good. And then there's this one guy in Kentucky who was super like strong in his own right and was known as like that dude in Kentucky. And he came down to Tennessee to challenge Joe to a fight. And it was just like, I guess the thing, like Joe enjoyed fighting and people fought. And so Joe actually invites him into his home, feeds him a meal. Reminds me of something that you would probably do. And he's like, here, have some dinner before I kill you. But like, let me feed you good, your last meal. So he feeds him real well. And after dinner, Joe invites him down to the cellar and says, hey, let's have some wine. And so he goes downstairs and maybe it was whiskey or something. And he pours him a glass of whiskey and this guy drinks it, hands the glass back to Joe, thinking that Joe's gonna pour himself a glass. And Joe puts the glass down, picks up the 30-gallon barrel, picks it up over his head, just drinks it out of the barrel. And this guy's like, Joe, it's been great. I'm gonna sober up, hit the horse, and get back to Kentucky. And so like these legends of this guy, right? And on top of it, 100, 150 years ago is when he lived into his mid 70s, which is like unusual. So I started hearing all these things. I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if Joe had some kind of Nephilim DNA in him. And that's why he was reproducing such large people. And he had this like unknown strength, like if people don't understand, like pigs get really big. Huge. And like I had two. And mine were American guinea hogs, which are known to be more the smaller breed. And when we processed those pigs, they were probably about 250, 280 pounds. I mean, they're huge. And to pick up a live one is even harder, right? And so if he has a full-grown pig that's bigger than what I had, and he's picking up live over the fence to just carry it away, I mean, that's some serious strength. And so it makes me wonder, like, if he had that kind of lineage in his bloodline. And with what you're talking about with, these biblical characters that are documented through scripture, it makes me wonder, like, how many of those still exist today? I mean, 100 years ago wasn't that long ago, Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's really interesting you say that. Those two lion-faced men of Moab show up to David, and he immediately promotes them to rulers in his army. Like there is more attributes than just the physical strength that accompany this, which is intelligence and leadership. Those qualities that translate to effective warriors and leaders of warriors are far more valuable than just the strength. Like the reason Goliath is the character that he is because he also was empowered by spiritual forces. He was cursing Israel by his gods. Like the non-human entity side of the equation can never be lost in the story. And you must always understand there is intellectual power based off capacity of individuals. And so many of these giants are physically, spiritually binding themselves into people nowadays to where they are like the gods of old, and they are becoming like the hybrids in their own sense, and they're being hijacked and parasitically used as if that entity now has a body. The disembodied spirit of the Nephilim is what was cursed to wander this earth. It was like there was no place found in heaven for these spirits, and there was no place under the earth for them to go to. And so they were wandering souls, and this is why they wander about in dry and desolate places looking for hosts, and it's some people I've seen acts of strength from people, children, that are beyond imagination, impossible strength. Like a giant was in the room. You know, I worked in a residential treatment center in Colorado, and it was called Devereaux Cleo Wallace. And this place had like semi-locked facility, and there was like 6-year-olds all the way up to 18-year-olds for various different issues, adjudicated youth, people that are serving sentences. And then you just had like Asperger's and autism unit, and all mixed together in this insane complex. And this little 6-year-old girl was freaking out, and they put them in quiet rooms. That's what they call it. It's like not a padded room, like a walled linoleum reinforced room with a serious door, you know, a cell. She's in that room, and all these staff are in there restraining her, all men, all like teenage or mostly college age guys. And they all have this little girl. I mean, arms are like this thick, pinning her down. And then she starts screaming in multiple voices in languages, start erupt like Twilight languages, like all this like deep guttural roaring, and lifts all of us off the ground from her back, lifts us off the ground. You're like, there's no carnal explanation when you start being lifted and thrown around by a little tiny child. Because as much as we could sit here and try to talk about what are the genetic traces and lineage, it gets watered down fast. You're 5 generations away from a fallen angel for the parent. You're only at less than 5% genetic stock. You know, like it diminishes rapidly, but the spiritual doors that get open in people's lives allow access to entities that are exceedingly more powerful. You're taking a Goliath and shoving it inside the 6-year-old little girl, a warrior for thousands of years that's never had to sleep, that's only had time to plot revenge and seek psychological manipulation techniques to destroy people's lives and to feed their own insatiable lusts. And that thing gets shoved inside of a child with no restraints. And it is just all on darkness. And you can feel the atmosphere in the room shift, like with icy, horrible, cold, dread, anguish. You know, and I started praying out loud in the name of Jesus at the time, like just in Jesus' name, we bind you from affecting this little girl, and we command you to get off of her and be silent and leave her. And it was like, it's not like the movies. I know the movies like to show it as these insane, ridiculous, crazy, theatrical, heads rolling and puking all the time. Sometimes demonic possession presents like that, but the vast majority of times it's authority. And it's a command authority, and you're superseding to the judge of all the earth to intercede in a situation where we are way outclassed and outgunned and outmaneuvered. But we're calling upon the one who holds the world in his hand, and that's a real powerful, all-consuming fire that can do that. And it gave that girl her sound mind back instantly. It wasn't some crazy, horrible thing. She just was her again. And that other thing was not there. And so the majority of the encounters that I have seen, when I've seen superhuman strength, have come from what I would say are demonic or spiritual possessions of the fallen. I would contend that the vast majority of the times I've seen that. When I got later on into life in the military, I saw genetically altered men who were nothing like people in specific body groups and areas of their stamina, their endurance, or like some of the guys, they would take these injections and their legs were just powerhouses, and they were kicking through doors, like reinforced doors, and doing unbelievable feats of jumping and acceleration. But other areas of their body weren't affected as much. And it really messes with them though, because there's a side effect where I feel like everything in pharmaceuticals has an unknown side effect, and that's the stuff that punished them in other areas of their mind. You know, other areas of their body became incredibly weak or degraded as their body tried to deal with the abreaction of it.
There's a guy that I had on the show. His name is James, I think. I'm just want to double check. Yeah, James Zubsky. I think I pronounced his last name right. He's out in Washington State, and he owns an outdoor store called Marge's Outdoor Store. Episode 591 was the first time he was on, and he was on again since, where we focused more on the super soldier aspect of him. And he is somebody, and I think I might have even talked about this with you last time you were here, but what you just said is exactly what he described happening to him. He got these shots. He's in the military, and you get injected with stuff. And he noticed after a certain round of shots, he could do certain things he couldn't do before, but it wasn't everything. Like, it wasn't like he was just like bulletproof. He could all of a sudden just run the mile in God knows how fast speed. He could do certain arm exercises and max out machines with no problem, but other exercises he was more normal. That's exactly what you're talking about. So like when people are being injected, say military people are being injected with stuff and being able to do these kind of feats, is it that they are being experimented on through the injections and they're just a lab rat, or is it that they're being injected because that's with a specific serum that gives them the ability to do things that they specifically are desired to do by the people injecting them?
Well, not necessarily by the person injecting them. More often than not, that's a grunt. But the individuals who I would say more often than not are psychological, industrial psychologists that are waging out war games. The military has a lot of reasons for why they do what they do. And so much of when they're doing Finders program, if you ever had a recruiter show up to your school and your high school and try to rally people up, they have a very different job. That's one of the only jobs in the Army you get fired for not fulfilling a quota. There's not a lot of jobs where you get kicked out for not meeting a quota. Recruiters have a totally different pressure. But a lot of the psychological testing and a lot of it's called the ASVAB, which is a generalized intelligence personality test skill set. And they say, this is how they pick your MOS, your job in the military. From day one that you start interacting with the United States military at a recruiter's office, or there is already tens of thousands, nowadays, millions and millions of data points that have been collected about you digitally since you were started out, since your mom took your first picture of the baby and put it on Facebook. Mm-hmm. Every one of us now goes through a different kind of human terrain evaluation with a profile that is known and accessed by the military. By the military, defense contractors, corporations, whichever entity you want to deal with. That is what builds out so much of what they're going to cater your experience for the military for, is they already have something in mind. As soon as you take the ASVAB, it's going to tell them a lot more about you than you know about yourself, because people are very good at weaponizing intelligence, and they've been doing it a long time. The military is better at it than most, the United States Navy in particular. But those tests are designed to figure out what cranks your gears and what you would be best suited at doing for the military, as well as how to manipulate you and control you and find out this is what makes them want to do what they do. So when guys start getting pulled into these other programs, they get when you go into in-process, you go to this place called MEPS, which is like where you're processed into the military. You get a lot of physical examinations and a lot of they're going to do all kinds of things like duck walk to see what your flexibility, your mobility is like, whether or not you have flat feet, hearing and vision tests. They're going to start probing you physically and more psychologically before they go ahead and make those kind of final assessments. But when you walk out of there, there's a dossier now on you biologically. There's blood tests that are done, and then they're going to start looking for specific precursors, not just internally, not just mentally, but internally.
In your blood and DNA?
Yes. Because in your blood and your DNA is going to have a lineage of your ancestry and your heraldry that most Americans, most westernized cultures, we have literally thrown out the door as worthless nonsense. But when you go back not too many generations, you have 1 million ancestors not long ago. And it is a very serious thing, ancestral heraldry, and how it impacts people generationally. And one of the predominant levels of that is how generational curses play out versus how generational blessings play out. And there's people that sit behind the scenes and maneuver that through oaths and curses of their children or their grandchildren to take inheritances from them later on. And these things physically manifest in their life later on. But that ancestral heraldry plays a major role in how engineered DNA altering viruses are injected into people to augment them. They're going to get different ones based off of what is already latent in their DNA, what is already a precursor that's incentivizing it. Because I have much higher concentrations of rods and cones in my eyes, which facilitates me being able to see and transition from day to night vision much faster than most people. It's not anything like superhero level crazy, but then after I got injections from the military, it cranked up to a level where I didn't need a lot of augmented light at all. And I was able to see much more readily in darkness. That was highly advantageous for the type of clandestine work that I was doing. And I loved that as an injection, right?
So
but that came from
nods?
a chimeric. You don't have nods. They break, they fail. You need batteries, and they're very obvious to other people that you're an operator. How many of you roll around with night vision goggles?
True, for sure.
It super stands out. Invisible killing was what I was into. Had nothing to do with being a uniformed soldier under the code of military justice. Had no bearing on my life.
So you're saying the injections that you got enhanced your eyesight even more, that you didn't not that you didn't want them, but you just didn't need them. Like where other people in the room that maybe were doing the same job would need them, you didn't need them.
They have a flashlight.
You didn't need a
or a chem light, right? You know, like I could take...
You're like a cat.
Yeah. Yes. And this is where you get into chimeric. See, if you don't know what's in it, you have no idea that you're now becoming a chimera. You know, that they're taking Jaguar. They're literally, there's the botanists out in the field and the cryptozoologist guys out in the field finding these rare species of once lost animals, or they're recovering their DNA from their corpses in museums, and they're taking that and they're bringing that back in for experimentation. What those guys are doing is selling that to pharmaceutical companies. That's where a lot of the research people meet the pharmaceutical industry. That's all part of the big arm of the military. They're the first secret sciences that go in as deep black budget projects. And that stuff's 40 years up beyond what you and I, normal civilian human creatures, get to see. We get their junk drawer leftovers when they're used up and tired of it, like cell phones. They're like, now you guys can have them. You know, like they're like transhuman neural links. They're like, yeah, now the population has been preconditioned to be able to accept this, that they should become cyborgs, you know, whereas soldiers have been augmented from World War II, you know, and they've been building little plutonium batteries and shoving them inside people and powering up electronics since the 1950s, you know, but to us, that's like a little bit out there, a little hard for people to understand. Put it in science fiction books and precondition the populace so they demand it and they want it. But that kind of augmentation strategy is what changes people and makes them no longer like that. The problem once I had that with my eyes is I started having color vision problems. So I could go through this rapid transition of being able to see more readily in the dark, but then I was losing depth perception and I started losing my ability to differentiate between the red-green spectrum because that's what got augmented. So there's always these like unknown side effects when you go and play in this game, and that's where I think at the end of the day, we're all guinea pigs. I think the United States, I believe it was under Bill Clinton, it might have been Ronald Reagan, who removed the safety standards so that human experimentation could be conducted on United States prisoners and United States soldiers. So like they say publicly, you know, we don't experiment on our own people. You know, we obviously don't give injections to pregnant women and tell them it's safe and effective ever. You can trust us. We're certainly for the good guys. Anyways, but the normal version of that has been tested out on soldiers and prisoners for decades. And so that's always where first line experimentation programs go, is onto prisoners and onto soldiers. I think a lot of them have no idea. A lot of them didn't volunteer for a super secret soldier program and sign a document that said, we're going to make you Superman.
Thanks, man.
No, most of them are unwilling guinea pigs, and all they're there for is to get the blood out of them after the fact. And they, even if it kills them, they don't care. They get the data. They're just like all the Nazi doctors that are doing the human. There's nothing different. Mengele and all the rest of those guys, they all operate in here, and all their sons and children do the same.
So, all right, before we go too much further, I just had this like thought that we just need to tell anybody tuning in for the first time. I told them to go back and listen to the first one, but just give me a 1,000-foot overview. Who are you? Just so that people understand. Like they're like, this guy's going 1,000,000 miles an hour. Who is he? Give him like the briefest background of who you are. Is that even possible?
Oh, yeah.
It's
okay. I can do an elevator pitch. It's all right, bro.
There you go. Let's do the elevator pitch.
Yeah, my name is Nathan Reynolds. Hello. No, I come from a family of people that were deep practicing Luciferians and who had been utilizing old world religion to try to rule and govern people from the shadows. And I was used as a battery bank for perverts and people that are more than willing to exploit their children in order to blackmail other people and control them and manipulate them. But that was never wasted. And so my family instead took the inevitable shattering and the splitting of my soul and weaponized it in dissociative identity disorder and split personality in order to try to engineer parts and pieces that were more conducive for the family's interest. And so my family comes from a long heraldry of people that do have of an appeal to kingship and thrones and powers and majesties, and they execute that as the divine right to rule. They rule from the shadows because they believe anonymity is without question far more effective as a means of controlling the nations than publicity. So I grew up in a family where secrecy was the currency and blackmail was the most effective way to build currency. And so I was a part of that from earliest years of my life, and ultimately led me into a life of a lot of violence and hatred and learning the arts of silent killing and how to terrorize targets. And I believed they were bad guys when they would tell me who to go hunt. And some of them were 100% convinced and witnessed them doing the worst kinds of things to other innocents. Others later on, you kind of figure out that I'm just a wet worker for other people's interests, and I'm not ever really going to be a free man. And so I was bound up in that for many years of my life. And I got emancipated to the United States Army as a junior in high school at 17 years old and began to work in their clandestine teams, just being a spy for them. And
we went over the Jason
yeah,
as well in the overtime. I think we've reached the 100th floor. So let's just ding.
Let's step off right into normalcy land.
That's the elevator pitch. But I want to kind of go back to what we were just talking about, because my next question was these injections and stuff. Do they wear off? I mean, have you noticed a decrease in your ability to be able to see as well as you once did at night?
Every one of them, I believe, does have a shelf life. And a huge part of my life getting out of the military was trying to detox my body, because I was sick, wrecked. I had multiple traumatic brain injuries. I was barely cognizant. I couldn't remember. I had no short-term memory. I couldn't remember people's names. I couldn't remember to stink and wipe my own butt after the toilet. Like, I was seriously disabled. I got out of the military and going to school for psychology in Colorado, and was out of my mind, struggling to put two sentences together like a bumbling idiot. And I knew I was dying, man. I had a heart Holter monitor, and I was hooked up to trying to figure out what was wrong with me, going to neurology clinics. I knew I was a mess. And I believe a lot of that is because there's hardwired kill codes built into the technology on one side of it. When you're no longer theirs, they turn it off. And that is a nightmare, because now your body's filled with all these nanoparticles and programmable matter and all of this disgusting black goop of stuff that is foreign contamination, and your body fights back. And some of the weird oddities of my family's history is that we ate horrible crap all the time. And so I learned early on, like, puke lots immediately, detox fast, sweat hard. Like when my body thinks something's a poison, a known poison, yeah, man, there's a lot of cannibalistic blood drinking and consumption of horrible things. Wow. Your body, in order to survive that, learns how to evacuate. And detoxification is one of those things I've been using my entire life to try to remedy that stuff. And I started using every bit of detox protocol I could, and diatomaceous earth and black walnut and wormwood and heavy, intense workouts and saunas and sweats and cold water. Like, I mean, my life has been devoted to trying to get healing and restoration outside of all the offers of the military. No VA, no support. I don't want anything from any of these people. I don't trust any of them after what happened and what I witnessed inside there. So I've been on my own trying to heal and cleanse myself and restore healing to my body for, my entire life now. So, all right, based on that, your family history, and you said your name is Nathan Reynolds. I want a clarification. Are you coming from the same family that is the Reynolds stuff that people have in their kitchen? No.
Okay.
No.
Because I was going to say, with that, then I was going to say, like, are they putting human body parts in the kitchen stuff? I
don't know about that. I know where they're putting human body parts into the pig supply and the pork supply. They're disposing of bodies. The Reynolds family used to own 60% of all the crematoriums and moratoriums in the United States and funeral homes, and they would dispose of bodies that way too. Pig farms, because a couple of pigs will dispose of a body in a few minutes, and then they feed that to the populace. Yeah, don't eat pig.
That you didn't raise yourself.
Could not strongly warn people against that enough. Parasites of hookworms are serious things. That's why a lot of Southerners are what Southerners are. Understand something. Southerners, and a lot of their speech and their cadence and their rhythm, it's hookworms. 9 out of 10 times.
Really?
1 for 1, they are ruled by parasites. Detox them, their brains turn on, and they're sharp and capable communicators almost immediately. Serious. Tapeworms and hookworms come pouring out of them. But they were mostly fed pork diets. Whereas out west, you see a lot less of it. And in the north, because beef tended to be the predominant thing. Sheep before that, but beef tended to feed them a lot more often. And they're far less prone to feeding you the parasites. So something to consider. Change your life forever. Do a detox, man.
Well, I got like a whole freezer full of pork right now.
Yeah. Something strong to consider, bro.
Even the ones that I raised?
Bro. It's really, there's a serious thing about, he gave us some instructions in the scriptures to try to keep us away from stuff that's definitely deadly. Pig is 100% an animal we know gets possessed by demons. Absolutely. The legions that come out of the two men, the demoniacs in the tombs, where do they go?
Pigs.
Straight into the pigs. And the pigs are fully possessed, total possession. Think about this. The power, the spiritual possession capacity of one man, two man, depending on which count you're in, filled a herd of pigs and it drowned them in the sea. That's because those spirits, when they lose their assignment on their target, they better bring a sacrifice back with them so they don't get their stinking lunch eaten by the higher principality that's ruling them. Those guys got possessed from a ritual of Bacchus. That community was raising those flocks of pigs for rituals to Bacchus, where there was this drunken revelry and this possession, total possession through sexual depravity of all things. And they would rip, the climax of the event was ripping apart the pigs and eating them alive, drinking the blood and consuming them. Those guys were possessed during that ritual and they could not get deliverance after it was supposed to be over. That's why they're out there in the tombs. That's why the whole community knew who they were, because this is supposed to go away after the festivities die down. But they stayed naked and running around and nobody could chain them up. Like, that's the power that's in there. But understand, this is why swine and pork is so heavily warned about in the scriptures. Like, don't eat it. Don't eat it. When you abstain from these things, like my family and I just started trying to eat the way that the scripture said, like literally. And it was unbelievable how many of the lights turned on in our brains, and like why it was valuable for us to try to find clean sourced food. It literally led me to become a farmer and a regenerative agriculturalist because it was hard to find real food. It was hard to find food that I didn't know with certainty wasn't tortured before it was killed, which does a lot. Adrenocortisol is a serious thing that gets shunted into the bloodstream when an animal is terrorized before it dies. All that cortisol gets shunted into the meat. That's why an animal tastes gamey. If you've ever eaten a gamey animal, that's because it died scared. Like if you kill a fish and if you catch a fish and you let it suffocate to death by throwing it in your cooler, it dumps blood all through its muscle tissue filled with cortisol. When you cut that fish open, you will literally be able to see blood in the tissue. That blood is what causes the gaminess, the fishiness of fish. But if instead you cut its arteries by its gills and then you kill it in the brain and cut its other vein that's on in the base of the tail, and you actually bleed that thing out, it'll keep for weeks without any of that smell. It's incredible what happens when you butcher animals the right way. And you like, even how you did butcher your pigs, quiet, no scary, not a feedlot.
It was quick.
No, you're not bringing the cattle into the chute and they're smelling blood and feces of all the other animals and the death is in the air and they're terrified. That feeling is by design. You'd never have to kill animals that way. You don't have to do that if you try to design a system that's a beast. But when you do that and you feed that meat to people, let me tell you, it's full of that blood. It is full of that cortisol. It is full of all those compounds that are not good, not beneficial, and they're detrimental. Versus like you go and learn how to do artisanal butchering. This is how I redeemed a lot of this crazy, insane stuff in my life because I love sharp knives and I like killing things. I'm going to just say that. I didn't enjoy always killing people, but I really enjoy giving something a dignified death, if that makes sense. And to me, there's no more dignified death than up close and personal and intimate with something that's a sharp tool. Like that's what I did with sheep that I raised. That's what I do with chickens I raised. I learned how to treat them with respect and kill them in a way that fulfills this contract that we've had. I've given you shelter and food and a wonderful, abundant life. And now you're going to help to provide for my family. And I bless you and I thank you for that life. I respect that animal. That's how it's supposed to be done. And when you eat animal that's killed that way, it tastes different. You also get to eat by the sweat of your face and you get satisfied in a way that nothing from a styrofoam package can ever give you. Yeah. So that's why I try to call people back to raising their own animals and to, if not, support the people that do. Find a guy who does it the old ways and does it the right way and support them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Around here, that's real popular. Like a lot of people do their own homesteading and they'll sell their crop and things like that to people around that maybe don't have that opportunity to do that, whether it's where they live or whatever. What you just said about, it's interesting because you said you enjoy killing, and that's obviously like a very unique thing, right? But I've heard it before, and it's interesting because this guy has a different background than you. He's never been on my show. And I don't think he ever will be, but he's local to here. And I've had conversations with him, and he has said things that make me feel that he never told me he enjoyed killing. But in conversation with him, some of the things he'll say, it's not normal. Like what you just said. You said the quiet part out loud, right?
I did.
And
I almost didn't want to.
yeah. But like he's gone through intense military background where he spent, I think it's about, I don't know, 6 or I think he says 6, maybe 10 years of actual military service in the Marines. But I spent like almost like 2 decades doing operations, and the stories he has is just wild. But I don't want to say exactly what he said to me to make me feel that way. But he said something to me that made me feel like he still desires a specific type of kill that he hasn't gotten yet.
Yeah.
And he didn't say he enjoys killing, but what you just said reminds me of that. Now, he doesn't claim, at least, to have a background like you, and I don't think he does. I mean, he does. That's interesting. He does come from a high-profile family in the military, and from what I understand, even his siblings are like him, their backgrounds. So maybe I should probably talk to him more in detail about this. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, oh, maybe there's something there to pull at for him. I wonder if he has any gaps in his memory. I doubt he does. I think he would have told me by now. But it's interesting. Let's just keep it away from what your family history is, and the fact that his family does come from a higher end military family. Do you think it's something with how the military trains their people and how you kind of were trained up even before the military, that it's a mirror image that creates people like that? Like, because from what I understand, your training started before you were military. And so you have a different history, at least theoretically, than him. But you both come to a similar...
Trauma.
You think it's trauma?
Trauma tends to be the common denominator that is sought after by all operations teams. Trauma. No dad. Another big one. That's a big one. Broken homes, violence, abuse, systemic manipulation, chronic desire to get out and being inescapably trapped. These are like prerequisites that build monsters. Learned helplessness is the behavioral way of saying it. I mean, we're raising generations of them by the millions right now. A bunch of people that feel impotent, unable to stop the nightmare that's happening out the door, feeling trapped, without fathers, without leaders, without any hope for a deliverance. It messes with a man. Bad.
Drives rage.
Yeah. Anger. And what's sought after most is not type A personality. Go get her, get it done. Dominant man. Competitive.
They can make that.
That's easy. But that's better geared towards grunts. That's better geared towards traditional warfare. When you're looking for people that do clandestine, third option, covert work, you want somebody that's passive aggressive. A passive aggressive personality style is far more advantageous to work with to create clandestine killers than any other profile. So that person that tends to stuff it real effectively and have a great poker face and be the chameleon. That's what's more often engineered and cultivated. So that's like when you take these personality tests or your children take them in school, it starts immediately. The first testing every one of these children in every school system in the United States take are designed to start finding them immediately. This is what GATE is, gifted and talented programs. This is what these special education programs are. So many of what people are sending their children to is designed to recruit and cultivate and handle and manipulate next generation warfighters, next generation newscasters, next generation politicians. It's all designed to facilitate that process. But when you look specifically at people that have psychopathy, right? This searing of the conscience and this ability to completely have no relevant understanding emotionally with those that are people, often that gets seared before they're 8 years old. That's when splitting is most readily capable of being done, and shattering of the mind and dissociative patterning to be able to begin, because then those broken pieces of an internal neural network are able to be worked over by handlers later on in life. So that's high on the list of you're taking a Q&A at the doctor and it says, do you come from a family of physical abuse or alcohol or substance abuse? Because a kid who grows up with a mom who's an addict understands the difference between two mommies, one that's high or coming down or looking to score. They're very different mommies, and they immediately are preconditioned to that kind of stuff. So that's why the CIA recruits guys like that. That's why they look specifically through records for those types of attributes. So in very deep military families, it's different. I wasn't raised in a overt military family at all. My family was handled by military people, but nowhere. We were a splinter cell family. We could not be ever noticed and affiliated with the United States military. There is no U.S. Army background by design. We are what's called a stay behind operators. These are people that are designed to stay behind enemy lines and let the whole entire country get overrun until they're activated. And they just keep making more and more and more clones of these sleeper cell soldiers who make more generationally until they ever are activated. That's how my family operated. And so by the time I got into the United States Army, I started being surrounded by normal grunt kind of guys, and guys that are just, hoorah, hoorah, but have never got their hands filthy, soaked in blood, and have no idea what it's like to puke down another man's throat because you're so scared. People have no idea the depravity of violence, nor is our culture really suited to listen to their stories. And at the end of the day, it's the lack of safe people to talk to that has kept so many of us buried in the darkness. We don't know who to trust with what we are and who we've been, and who is a friend and who is a foe, or who's here to just manipulate us and handle us and use us for somebody else's filthy desires. We understand everybody's a liar. Best to start there and let them prove themselves by their fruits, whether or not these things are true. And it's really hard because you're isolated, you're alone, and you're your own worst enemy. You will sabotage every relationship you've ever had. You will ruin anyone that gets close to you to try to keep them alive. The hardest man I have to deal with in the mirror is not some other guy who comes to try to kill my family. It's me who seeks to ruin my own family. There's a reason 90% of war fighters lose their marriage.
Yeah.
The silent suffering victims of our wars and our clandestine secrecy organizations are our children and our spouses. They suffer in the land of, I don't know what happened to my husband, but he can't tell me. And that's wrong. That's not the way he designed it to be. He says clearly in the scripture, what war fighters are supposed to do when they come home is spend 7 days just talking to each other outside the camp. Don't go home to wives. Be with each other. Decompress, share your stories. In World War II, the United States military was very good at helping the veterans coming back on ships, spending weeks together, decompressing, talking about all the horrible stuff.
Get it out.
Get it out. Talk about it with other guys that get it and aren't going to look at you like a monster because you got to go home and talk about cutting the balls off of some guy and strangle him to death. Violence is infectious. Radical evil is highly infectious, and the gods of war are unbelievably powerful. It takes over and possesses people. And good, normal Christian guys that went to Baptist church every week, when they came home, had to stuff it all in a box because the culture doesn't tolerate that kind of depravity. People saw Saving Private Ryan and suddenly had a paradigm shift, and they're like, oh my gosh. You can't even imagine what it's like to wrestle hand in hand in front of people's children and kill their father and then have to kill them.
Yeah.
But a lot of guys did, and they need to be able to talk about that. So if you can learn, I talk about my wife in the book, her name literally means safe harbor. That's what she provided for me. That's the single most important thing that woman ever provided to me, was a safe harbor where I could talk about horrible stuff and she not run away and leave me.
Well, side note, because I'll forget to say this later. Do you think she'd ever come in and talk?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. We should arrange some time.
It would be great.
I know, not without you, but like I know you got the kids and everything, so you.
I know, but we do tag team style, bro.
Okay.
For one of us to be able to do this, the other one's going to have to be able to do that.
I got you.
We don't let other people watch our children.
I got you. I mean, you can bring them.
There's no babe. Oh, we do. They go everywhere with us. They are.
Yeah.
We're a chad, man. We are a tight knit crew. There's not been many days I'm ever away from them, nor them from us.
Yeah.
You know, there ain't no grandma and grandpa hanging out and taking them, and we don't
Certainly
have babysitters and all that stuff.
I understand.
We raise our children.
Yeah. Anybody who doesn't understand, just listen to the first episode. You'll understand why there's no grandparents involved.
Yeah. Not my side.
Yeah.
My wife has a good family. Praise God. She got normal.
Yeah.
Mercy.
Yeah. Big time. So you were talking a little bit here, and you even brought it up a little bit, the chameleon aspect of the assassins and stuff. And we should probably pull at that thread a little bit, what that even looks like. And, you know, like, all right, so when you say chameleon assassin, you're talking about somebody who blends in everywhere and is the silent killer, right? A
better way maybe of saying it would be a perception manager, you know, that the big art of learning is how do people respond to other people? And generally they frame people in their mind based off of an initial, when you first see somebody, within about a 3-second period, you've deduced about 80% of everything you will ever deduce about that person. There's a preconditioned pattern that every one of us has based off of our culture, our climate, everything, how we've been engineered by corporate media, all of it, to frame people quickly. You know, and depending on what part of the country you are and what kind of community and people you hang out with, it's framed differently. And so much of weaponizing that is learning how to become what people expect to be seen in any given context or situation. That's where the chameleonic aspect of clandestine operators are. That's where espionage and spies operate in, is becoming like their environment perceives them to be, what should fit the scene. A chameleon physically changes its color patterning to match the background noise. That's a gray man. The gray man principle is to mirror the environment of that area that he's around. So when I go into a normal big city, you know, it's not expected to have the big straw hat and the big John Deere thing. That is an outlier instantaneously, right? If you speak even with certain types of accents, you're immediately junk drawered into people's idiot bin. You know, even you and I were talking earlier before here, like you even don't want to go to certain places because you think you'll be branded as Latino, right? And they're going to think you're an illegal and they're going to treat you different. But if you put
on the long beard, if I had that long beard,
no, you got to go for the long beard, bro.
If I had the long beard, they think I'm a terrorist, man. They've said it a million times.
It's your super weapon.
It's my
super weapon. Your manly hair is your super weapon. Bodily hair is a super antenna. Don't you ever doubt it. It's an extension of your nerves. Try it out. Anyways, read number 6. Samson was Samson for a reason.
I got you.
But that inability for you to maybe conceive of how then do I manage that guy's expectation on that field? Like, I changed outfits constantly. And it wasn't noticeable until I was married. You know, then suddenly I had I noticed my wife didn't do that. I had suddenly, like, having a spouse changed my standard of norm. Because when you only ever hang out with you, yourself, and I inside the inner world, you don't notice it. There's nothing to contrast it to. But I noticed that she didn't change outfits based off of every single area of town we were going to. You know, like, she would wear one thing. And I was like, yeah, but don't you understand that these people are going to expect to see somebody who looks like this, acts like this, talks like this, walks like this. And so literally being able to put on that person. You know, like if you're wanting to go out here with Bojang Jangles out into the sticks, you got to know exactly how do country folk around here talk when they got their John Deere tractor and they're cutting hay, and what's a day look like for them. But it's not just the mental idea, it's becoming that. That's the difference between somebody that's been programmed and has different personalities. Is it's like you literally, authentically, in the die-hard heart of yourself, become that person. You know, like when I want to infiltrate an underground tunnel area to find out who are the pimps in an area, I literally, physiologically, psychologically, I completely become one of them. I become them as they are, right? And what they expect to see from, let's say it's a John, and you're imitating a guy who's looking to score a girl, or you become one of the drug addicts who's fiending, right? Do you even know how to imitate people that are coming down specifically off of one drug and trying to score? Like, people don't tend to sit down and watch their neighbors enough to understand what all these different facets and features of our society at all the different levels look like. But the guy in the corporate suit's looking to score too, and he goes and deals with a different kind of drug circle. And so being able to put on these different personalities allows you camouflage to get past people's guards. And that's 90% of all the legwork for doing anything like penetration testing, and you're trying to infiltrate and get beyond people's natural defenses. That comes from doing all the legwork ahead of time of understanding your target, understanding who they are, and becoming exactly what they need you to be in order for you to be invisible. Because that's everything. You know, if you look like a big, scary, buff dude, you're going to be treated like a big, scary, dangerous threat to somebody that's on guard duty. But if you look like a completely tiny, helpless, lost, wounded little child, they're going to only see you as a victim, and they'll be incapable of seeing your neck coming into their throat. That's the goal. The goal is to get all the way in up close like a praying mantis who slowly and incrementally works their way forward and decimates their prey with rapid violence from something that was seemingly a stick. That's chameleons. That's what splinter cells that operate in behind enemy lines do. They look like fat people. Like most SAS like guys that are actually operating in clandestine teams, they're like not good looking at all. They don't look like good, strong, big, buff Navy SEAL guys that you see paraded around as our elite warriors. Like they're generally look like lumpiness. They look like now they could smoke you in a marathon. But these guys have a completely different set of blending in. They're middle-aged Americans driving a beat-up Toyota Camry, right? They can make a phone call and get anything they need, but they operate from the shadows by design. And a big, buff, scary, militant guy is very obvious. And so those don't fit into most people's norms unless they're infiltrating that community. Then they're bulking up. Then you're getting the creatine and all the roid rage, baby, and you're just becoming that guy if that's where you're being sent in and targeting. But chameleons are designed to be ghosts until they are 100% absolutely horrific, and then they disappear back into the different, they call it the invisible college, where you slip back into a different identity and you change your hat, you change your clothes, and you disappear and become somebody completely different. That's the danger of an assassin. They don't look like anything noticeable, and the person you saw back before there has changed that has utilized signature reduction and augmented their face and their cadence. Like I used to put thumbtacks inside my shoes in different spots so that when I was walking, I could press on that and make it incredibly painful. That changes your cadence. That changes your walk. It makes you limp, right? Things like that. Or you put little things inside your mouth to augment your cheekbone structure so that facial recognition doesn't have the same means of detecting you. You know, there's a whole lot of facets and features that are there to help facilitate that process. And some of them come from very good, deep training. Others can come from people that just figured out street smarts when they were young and were around a lot of crime and a lot of gangs. Those guys figure it out too, how to survive.
You know, what you're talking about reminds me of Christian Bale and how he's able to change the way he physically looks for certain roles. You know, like if he's going to be Batman, he's looking jacked. And there's been movies that he looks like just a rail, like a depleted
insomniac.
Yeah, just is that what the movie was? Yeah. So it's like that's kind of like what I'm picturing when you're describing this. Just somebody who has the ability to do such things. There is, I don't know how recent this was, but I just heard about it. I think this morning actually. There was some kind of prisoner exchange with Russia and another country. I don't think it was our country, but two of the prisoners that were given back to Russia were spies, and they were in this whatever country it was for long enough where I think they were a married couple that were both spies, and they wound up having children. It was in a Latino country because the kids spoke Spanish. The kids had no idea that they were actually Russian and that their parents were spies until I guess it all kind of went down and they got sent back to Russia. But I mean, I think these people lived in this other country for 20 some years. They just became the community and culture that they were placed into. And that's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like these people were spies. And I think we often associate that kind of aspect with people who are spies. Like you don't know they're here, they're just spying. But you're saying assassins as well. So it's like they just live among us until they're you know, they get that call like Jason Bourne, you know, and it's just like they get triggered into doing it and they're woken up. But in that process of whatever. I guess they're still conscious of what they are though, right? It's not like they're totally just out of it.
Well, they're not like a dumb idiot who's like drooling on their knuckles as they're going around. Like, what is sought after is a very high baseline intelligence early on. Stanford Binet personality psychology test is what's used very early on to identify in 18-month-old children, young children, exactly what intelligence precursors are and ones that can be patterned early on. Because the earlier the sooner you shatter the mirror of them psychologically through massive trauma, the sooner you do that, the more pure pieces you can work with because there's not patterning yet. And then you can start the patterning process. So if you start with somebody that's already 2 to 3 standard deviations above norm, say they're 130 IQ, 145 IQ, you can have a higher base rate of intelligence points to work with in any given individual personality. That's why there's such a heavy emphasis on those early child developmental projects to be able to recruit them and then bond them with a handler when they're 6, when they're 7, when they're 8 years old, and they come in and they bond to them and then they disappear again. And they later on in life, and this people think it's like some woo-woo sci-fi hypnosis. No, these are like friends, uncles, counselors, school therapists. Like, these are people that are part of your normal community who have allegiances, secret allegiances to other parties. That's why they will pull somebody like that and build out that dossier and submit that back to HQ, whoever that may be. And they say, this one would be a good candidate. I have already built this level of trust with them. Should ever we want to use them, and many of them they may never touch again, but they've already pre-patterned them and built in that mind control so that later on they can activate them and use them. And it's not always this, it's not staring at lights and flashing in that. People sincerely do things out of their convictions, out of their beliefs, out of their desires. It's out of their thoughts, original thoughts, first and foremost, that all beliefs and actions are inevitably the fruit thereof. But so much of that handling is literally people controlling people's desire. And if you find people that already have baseline desires they're extremists, right? Is what we call it, weaponizing extremists. People that are zealous for the cause, all in kinds of people. The best group for that is young men who don't have wives, who have no outlet for life, no real purpose, and they're wandering around aimless. Those are the easiest to weaponize.
That's my brother Jack.
Bro, Jack, I'm praying for you to find a mighty wife, bro. I'll be praying for that guy.
I'm just kidding, man.
Bro, Jack's a hero over here slaying it. You guys don't see any of this, bro. There's a guy over here just utterly devastating all the media side of this and just tearing it up. I appreciate you, bro. You're killing it from the sideline. Everybody's got to have an Alfred,
I can't see his face right now. I don't know if he's mad or
he's got a face. He has a pronounced face at you right now. Like, thanks for roping me in like that, dude.
Yeah,
Big brothers.
Yeah, buddy.
That's a thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But that level of intentional manipulation and handling comes in later on, so that the personality that gets triggered is one that is authentically them. It's just a side of them that to their peers doesn't exist. And then when it's suddenly there, boy, that's pronounced difference. You know, like I presented most of my life as grade B- by design. Like I sat down and took tests and practiced taking tests to get exact scores over and over and over again. Was trained to get certain scores. Like I went into the ASVAB and I was told I need to get an 81 to an 87. I got an 83. Most people don't go into it being told the score they're supposed to have. You know, most people go in to take the ACT and they're thinking about college admissions tests. They're not thinking that you can never be too high up ever throughout your entire life. But that's how spy families like that couple you're describing, their children can never be excellent. They are forced into anonymity the rest of their life. They will never be allowed to stand out. There will never be a big, fancy, wonderful look at my family day. It's not like that for them. They will be relegated to obscurity. And they will be forced into a religion, an ideology, a culture, and a lifestyle that's absolutely false. That's brutal to wake up one day and realize that your parents were lying to you from day one. That sucks. There's a lot of children that find out one day dad is not even their dad. Yeah. That breaks trust fundamentally. Well, then who is the counseling arm and that friend that steps in that devastating situation? That's the next handler. As much as you see the spies being the ones that were caught, it's the children that they were really there for. Because it takes a special thing to make a child like that, to grow up like that. And now they get to become the next generation of spies. They have another vendetta. I had a bunch of whys that made me prone towards it, so that when somebody did cultivate and give me excellence and give me great training and give me resources, what came out of me was this absolute, totally different thing than what was there on the other side of that wall. And that's how a lot of these guys operate. They get a phone call, yes, from somebody they care about, somebody they trust, somebody that's a dear friend to them, telling them that they need their help, telling them that they need them desperately, and they swoop in to help them and save them. It's not always so sexy and spy-like. A lot of it is just good manipulation beforehand and setting the hook in the relationship early on, you know?
Wow. How prevalent are these, sleeper cells? These people that are just kind of waiting for the orders. I mean, is like we're in Tennessee right now. I mean, is there like maybe a dozen of them or hundreds of them? You know?
Individuals or cells?
Well, I said cells thinking individuals, so
No.
I'm thinking individuals.
Individuals? Oh, there'd be tens of thousands, without question.
Where? In Tennessee?
Absolutely. Do you understand what kind of critical infrastructure just Tennessee has? You know, you got
Tens of thousands
You
in
got nuclear
Tennessee.
power plants. Yes.
Wow.
You got nuclear power plants. You got a lot of really critical infrastructure and secret government, the Y-12 complex. You got a lot of spies just in the surrounding 60 miles from where we're sitting.
Like right here?
A lot of sleeper cells right here.
Really?
Yeah. Because covert intelligence agencies send their spies here to do the same thing. You know, foreign nationals want to deploy their assets over here to be waiting behind enemy lines for when they want to invade our country. You don't invade our country with big giant planes flying over the sky and easy prey Red Dawn style. You know what I'm saying? You invade the country 60 years beforehand. This is like what the model for this game is in the 1960s in Guatemala. The CIA was testing out and beta testing what's called third option variables on how to do covert warfare. And they had a real screw up bad in North Korea. They started trying to fly, you know, spies in, assassins in overseas and drop them behind enemy lines. What happened was they had no resistance force already there. They had no backup. So they were dropping in all these super well-trained people who were trying to land in fully enemy occupied territory, and the population itself wasn't there to raise up the guerrilla force to be the insurgency or the counter-insurgency effort that they needed. So what they did is all these corporations were wanting to do the wars down in Guatemala, right? They wanted to protect the corporate interests of United Fruit Company. They used to own like 72% of the land in Guatemala used to be owned by the government or corporations, predominantly the United Fruit Corporation, right? Where all your bananas are coming from and all your pineapples and all your sugar, crack, cocaine, all the goodies. There was a change in government where they wanted to repatriate the land back to the people and the population. United Fruit Company was like, heck stinking no. How about we call the military? Thank you, General Spendley Butler. We'd like to hire you to come invade our country and have a war here and make sure that our puppet is put in power and control so that he's in our state interests. So what they did after all the debacles of the things they learned in Korea was they preconditioned the populace and began grabbing dissidents, guys who were already radicalized and anti the government that were in hiding. And they brought them in and began to build them a cell network, build them a guerrilla force, finance them. Hundreds of millions of dollars began flowing in for weapons, communications, for training. And they build up a guerrilla force of sleeper cells way before D-Day, so that everything was set up and in place so that it could become a turnkey operation so that, okay, now that we've done all the training and now we have all our assets in place, now we'll go ahead and start bringing in the military. Because there's two major codes that regulate the United States law regarding this type of killing of other people, right? Title 10 is the United States Military Department of Defense, Uniform Soldier Code of Military Justice. Laws applied to them that are different than laws that apply to the National Security Council. Very important. Most Americans never hear or think much about this side of the equation of the branches of the United States military and government and defense forces. Critical factors here. They operate under something called Title 50-2, which gave them legal grounds to commit covert assassination, strategic killing, targeted assassinations. The legalese has changed over the years, but that's where the legal powers for no law applies to us comes from. So why intelligence assets are able to do this kind of activity and build out these networks is because they don't follow the same rules as local law enforcement and EMS respond. They don't follow any of these same confines of man. And when they name drop somebody at a traffic stop, everything goes away. That comes from a totally different literal legal power in the United States judicial code than what most people are aware of. When they invaded Guatemala and the big guns came in and the Marines came in and they started having Air Force support and all the rest, it was a mop and drop because from within, those sleeper cells decimated the resistance that was there. The formalized resistance, radar stations are blown up, critical infrastructure like your power plants blown up, water treatment facilities, hospitals are destroyed, critical commands and communications. Those spies that have been infiltrating society for a long time did their dirty. And then they disappeared back into the normal society in shadows, and the United States assets disappeared and reinstalled the puppet dictator. That became the model. And they're like, that was very effective. Let's do that. Pattern it and stamp it and repeat, rinse and repeat. And they've been doing that all over the world. That's how colonial powers and corporatocracy of like the Anglo-American British establishment have been functioning for a long time. And they've just gotten better generationally. But those children of those sleeper cells and those splinter cells, they've been pouring in here to our country for all kinds of different reasons. And they've been raising up these types of clandestine operators who are beholden to other governments, who are beholden to other entities of power and have different religious beliefs and convictions. Some of them are absolutely Satanists. And they were assuredly here to bring about the pantheistic, trans agenda. And that's the deity they worship. And so they infiltrate their agents everywhere. The Church of Scientology had 500,000 of them pouring out across the country doing this kind of thing. Operation Snow White. They got busted. They're like, yeah, they were all breaking into the IRS offices and changing tax records and all the rest. But they had splinter cells all over the entire United States. When you get billions of dollars, billions, like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, billions of dollars of assets they've been embezzling and hiding through child exploitation rings, buying up land deals and real estates. They've got splinter cells of their own infiltrated all over the place to protect their better interests. Same thing for Google, same thing for Facebook and NASA. They all have their own versions of this, and they don't all play for the same team. And occasionally they go to war with each other. They're just quiet wars.
That's just like the spiritual realm too. Like I talk about at times on the show how, I think traditionally we want to look at it as, there was the fall of the angels. Lucifer was, the ringleader. And they fell. They're all on the same team, and they hate God. Yeah, they hate God. But I think that I think there's an understanding that like, okay, Satan, he's top dog here, but you and I think I'm better than you, and I think they war with each other
like
as well.
Big Joe.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that that's a very real thing that happens. So kind of going with what you're saying, and these organizations like say Facebook and Google, like we from our perspective, like, oh man, they're on the same team, they hate us and we hate them kind of thing, but we got to use them, darn YouTube, and but in reality, I mean, there's times that behind the scenes they're going at each other as well because they have their own interests. So yeah, I had another question that I was so with these sleeper cells, say spies, sleeper cells, individual chameleon assassins. For people who are hearing this, and maybe the answer is no, but is there any way a normie could be on alert to because there's definitely people listening right now that are not buying a thing you're saying. There's people on the other end of the perspective that are 100% yep in on everything you're saying, and maybe for those people, they're going to have a higher tendency to start thinking about people in their own lives. They're like, man, I wonder if he's that person. Is there anything that you could give them as like a way to identify so that they're not going after their neighbor who's 80 years old and saying, I think you're a commie spy. Yeah. In reality, it's just, no, I lost my wife 40 years ago and I lived alone, a life of celibacy. And thanks for bringing that up. You know what I mean? So, is there anything that or is it like really that impossible to identify?
No, by no means. First and foremost, I believe the most powerful gift that we can ever have is the gift of discernment. And I believe that just from whatever it's worth, my personal conviction is that comes through the Holy Spirit. That comes through an authentic relationship and covenant with the Most High, the Judge of all the earth, and through His Son, Yeshua the Messiah. Like that's where I believe supernatural insight can give us the ability to read people's mail way beyond their capacity of facades that could ever be there. You can know and identify people by their fruits. So first and foremost, I want to put that out there, is I believe that there's a spiritual terrain map that you can read on people to find out what's going on besides that. However, most people, pastors in that regard, are not able to detect and understand that dissociative identity disorder is one of the best kept secrets in the entire field of psychology and in warfare. Because if you read the symptoms, the symptoms, it used to be called and classified out of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, multiple personality disorder. This has been put in movies and character stuff, and they've shown all kinds of version of this over time. Some of them accurate, some of them not. If you can understand what the actual symptoms of DID, dissociative identity disorder, are, just even basically educating yourself on that is one of the most foundationally beneficial tools that you can have for understanding, wow, I know some people in my life, like you said, who start popping up into your mind that have missing time. They're missing time. Like they don't remember what happened. Dissociation isn't some kind of like crazy thing. You dissociate, everyone dissociates. It's just to a variability of it. And there's a spectrum of that. When you drive in your car, if you've ever been driving in your car and you've driven the same way there and back from work over and over again, and you get into that zone where you're just driving and suddenly you kind of realize you don't really remember all of it, but you're home, that's basic dissociation. It's a normal thing because our body was doing something we've done so many times now, we don't even think about it. But when you first got in a car and started learning to drive, you were paying attention like your life depended on it. It was super intense. You were terrified.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't even know where the gas is and the brake is. I can't feel the pedal and all that. But you get to a stage in life where you've driven, you're a driver. You get this. You get to a stage where you can literally darn near black out on the road and be like, wow, apparently we went a long ways without realizing it. That's dissociation. Missed exits.
Yeah.
Think about this. You're pulling tens of thousands of pounds in a vehicle that can utterly destroy stuff, and you are literally driving past exits. That you would never think when you first started getting in the truck to get your CDL that this is ever going to happen.
It took me back to, and I don't want to go into trucking, but I will say this: when I started learning how to drive tractor trailer, I started off on like school buses and Class B. That wasn't that big of a deal to me. It was just learning, you got to take your turns wider. But when I started driving trailer, that took me back to my high school years of learning how to drive a car. That's the fear that I had. I was terrified because I was like, what if I do this wrong? If I do this wrong right now, a lot of bad things happen. A lot. Yeah.
Major consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. But then to go from that to missing exits, and everybody's seen it. Truckers doing things that probably aren't the best to do on the road, but you're talking about somebody who's extremely maybe too comfortable in the seat, and you see them do certain things. And when you're driving around Philadelphia and you see a very tight window to get your truck into another lane, but it will provide smooth sailing for the next 5 miles, you take that opportunity, but you're not thinking about it. You're just kind of on autopilot and you just go. And so that's kind of like the disassociation that you're talking about, I assume. And
that's a very complex task being managed by your body and your mind without your conscious override. Okay, this is because you have two different governing systems in your brain. You have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. What's happening in your left hemisphere is governing the right side of your body. What's happening in the right hemisphere is governing the left side of your body. The left side of your brain is one that is very much the place of reasoning and communication, wants to explain stuff that's going on. The right side is more like visual-spatial pattern recognition, but not words. It's not the side like you can watch some incredible videos of people who had their corpus callosum severed. That's the communication hardware wire between the two hemispheres. When you sever that, and you separate those two hemispheres and you isolate them, you can be looking at your left eye at stuff that's over here, and you can be registering it as words and speak and communicate those words. But you show the right eye over here, it can't even communicate with words what it just saw. Even if it says house, it can't communicate that it saw a house. It has no words. But then you ask them to draw it, they pick up their pen with their eyes closed, they'll draw a house. So that patterning system is active today. There's areas of your vision right now that are not actually capable for your eye to see because of literally where light comes into your eye. There's blind spots, but your brain does a good job at covering that stuff up and shielding you from seeing that. So what ended up happening that brought so much of what the old religious, old world family orders had been doing, which was taking that patterning system. This is like what the priest class would hold back close, and trauma and abuse and incantation from the womb on, and to traumatize a child and make them a slave to the host of these demons and unclean spirits, and to make them obedient to the priest class or to the kings. That got weaponized to the masses during the human experimentations in World War II. When those doctors in the different camps began to do these experimentations on twin studies and all these dark sciences, what they took out of there was ways of weaponizing the trauma to shatter and split a personality to create ultimately what they desired, which was the mind-controlled slave that doesn't know they're a mind-controlled slave. A spy that doesn't know they're a spy. So if they're ever caught, they can never confess the secrets, because to them, they never, ever did anything related to this. I have no idea why I'm in Austria right now. I have no idea. And that personality sincerely doesn't. Jennifer Garner is a real-life Manchurian candidate. She is a carbon copy cutout of the process from trauma, splitting, mind control, manipulation.
The actress?
Absolutely.
Really?
100%. That's a CIA recruitment poster walking. That's her job.
How
her job.
Where are you getting?
Dude, if you go back and study her history and her parents, her family, and how she was raised and brought up, and then you study the types of scripts that she gets and who her handlers are, who her media handlers are, who her promotion agents are, and where she got her money for the roles that she did, understand she's the propaganda arm to recruit people into clandestine operations. You know, this is why certain actors are 100% owned and have been from the beginning. They're a mind-controlled slave. Their fidelity, their loyalty is not to they, themselves, and theirs. Their loyalty and fidelity is to a completely different hidden hand that rules them. And all they are is a walking propaganda piece to manipulate the masses and drive them in different directions. This is why certain people get the media package, and they are front and center all the time. And the agenda of what comes out of their mouth and who they sponsor and who they advocate and politically, all that's controlled for a reason. But that started when they were little. That started when she takes certain roles of being a spy and being a secret operator, that's because that's what she has been and was put into her. And they put out the truth like an Alias. That's a series that she did. That's the real story of how mind control and deep sleeper assassins are patterned and developed, publicly released, so people could learn how to do that to their own children. And that process starts by doing lots of trauma before they're 8 years old. So when you start to investigate and ask people questions about their childhood and find out what took place in their life, generally a personality gets sculpted and shaped before 8 years old. 6 to 8 years old tends to be the very end spectrum of it. So the abuse happens early on. And that's a way that people make black budget money, is from selling that abuse side of the equation and profiteering off of that and exploiting the people for the secrets of the blackmail from that process. That's why these three things are so intimately connected, is because blackmail always is intimately tied to child abuse, is tied to drug trafficking. It's tied to clandestine money that needs to get financed in so that you can have black budget wars, so that we can sell the cocaine to the streets and flood the market with our product. Well, we need cutout guys to be able to do this job for us. And then we're going to go buy weapons and fight secret wars over here where you guys aren't looking. This is why when the Iran-Contra hearings came out, it's a big deal. Because it exposed, this is what we're doing. This is why the church hearings came out. And they're like, we're doing a bunch of mind control and we're killing and assassinating people over. These are...
What church hearings?
That's the Church Senate Committee hearing in the 1970s that brought forth a lot of the United States military's mind control and how they were doing MK Ultra and Project Artichoke and a lot of these things that they said, okay, Jolly and West and these guys that were doing this mind control human experimentation programs, we're not going to... We're not going to do that anymore.
Is church a name, or are you talking about
I believe church is one of the heads of the investigation side of it. I could be wrong on that, but that's generally how they're referred to.
Church. You're talking about
individual.
Okay.
Yeah. Generally, these investigative reports or committees are chaired by an individual, and their name goes on the report. There's those. That's how then they're colloquially referred to later on in life.
Yeah.
But when those subcommittee hearings came out and people revealed, these are how wars are happening secretly and silently behind the scenes, and we're using as a weapon of warfare. We're using abuse and mind control at psychiatric clinics to use weaponized hypnosis. People are freaking out, and they're like, "Okay, we'll shut it. We'll turn it off. No more MK Ultra. We promise. You can trust us." You know, we won't infiltrate the media that we already did. You know,
Yeah.
but that's how a lot of that gets brought forth. So looking and identifying it, asking them about missing time, asking them about their relationships in their past and their families, sincerely trying to find out, are they who they are consistently, or do you see major behavioral changes? They're often misdiagnosed 6 to 8 times before they're properly diagnosed with DID. They tend to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, chronic depression, schizoaffective disorders. They're very often are misdiagnosed because psychologists and psychiatrists are not trained to look for DID. They're told it's not that common, so just don't look into it, because that's how they control these individuals. They don't want that secret getting out. But there's a whole list. I have chapters in my book talking about some of the clues for what to look for in
Right
there.
here.
I wrote a book about all this for a reason. It's hard to communicate everything in an hour.
Jack was a little late on the camera switch.
Snatchedfromtheflames.com.
Yeah, there you go.
For what it's worth.
Snatchedfromtheflames.com. Okay, so talking about this stuff, I mean, so that's kind of, I guess, how if somebody, I mean, it's probably not that healthy to walk around suspecting everybody to be involved in this.
I mean, that could wear you out a little bit.
Yeah.
Wear you out a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's probably the best practice probably be to just be aware. And if something kind of really hits on a scale, maybe you start
paying attention
a little more.
Yeah. I start asking for everything hidden to be revealed. I think that's a really powerful prayer.
Yeah.
You just start asking. And you know what? Some of the other times you can also just say, the thing that got me, I test people all my life, whether or not they're safe or unsafe. And it's very awkward when you try to get into a relationship with somebody else, because you don't know whether or not they have an ulterior motive. But over time with Chelsea, I saw consistency of character. I saw consistency of ethics and morals and values and intentions. I saw sincerity of who she was. She was integral. She was an integrated person. She was a whole person. She was a singleton. That's how we call it. And she was a normie. But she showed me this layer of love that was very unfamiliar to me. That was unadulterated. That was pure. And I know I grew up knowing this word and reading it about unconditional love. But it was a concept that had no meaning to me, because I had such manipulative torment through love that I did not feel it. I did not feel it. I did not resonate with it. But as I began, oh man, dude, it came out really bad. Obvious signs of trauma, like when she could touch my back. People before, I was a mess, dude. I'm still a bit messy, but I was way worse. If people touched my back, because part of a pressure points and triggering is people come up and squeeze pressure points, and then they say certain words and sequences and hand gestures as they touch you, right? Like a lot of perverts like to grope boys, and they say these things into their ears to try to get that seducer part of them out. Okay. Once I was out of that world, I never wanted to be touched. And when people touched my back, I elbowed them through the nose. I was absolutely...
What'd you do to your wife?
It was awkward. It was some awkward conversations, But she also had to learn very quickly, okay, he's kind of like a startled animal. Yeah. He's kind of like a kid in the cage who's twitchy. That's what we used to just call it. We called it quirks. That's how I write about it in the book, like quirks. If she opened up a bottle of lotion to put lotion on her hands, I was gagging uncontrollably and getting nauseous, out of my mind, enraged, beet red, sweating, full ab reactions, losing it, panic attack. She's like, I'm just putting on lotion. I'm like, don't touch me with that. She's like, wow, that's very intense, But she didn't have any room to put that on a shelf of understanding. There was just that. My husband's a little weird, about that. Touching my back was like that. Feces, children screaming, this kind of stuff, man, made me go nuts. And otherwise, I was pretty happy, just joyful little guy, bouncing around to churches and all the rest of it. And then I would be like that occasionally. But everything else was behind the wall. Everything else was behind the wall. But those little things were unknowns for her until she finally got to a place of like, my husband is a completely different. She noticed I was a completely different person around my family. She noticed that I was completely different when I was around them. She started seeing a lot of breadcrumbs of you're not the same person. And once I got switched personalities wise into our marriage and started going by Nathan and wearing the guns and the body armor, it obviously became more obvious then. But when all those different parts and pieces of my personality began to express themselves to her and be transparent about who we were, we saw the consistency of character for her loving us and still providing the safe harbor for us to talk about these things and she wasn't running away. Like my whole life I was told that if you ever talk about this stuff, everyone will leave you. You'll go crazy. You'll never have any relationships. You'll lose your mind. They'll lock you in an institution. You'll be divorced and naked. These like horrible things they would say to me. So I assumed that's what's going to happen when I told her, but it didn't.
Why do you say us? Do you view yourself as different people?
Oh yeah, dude.
Is it like consciously? You say that because of that?
It's easier to communicate as a me and a we than as a I. I know, and that's awkward. You're going to read that in the book. If you read the book, it's going to roll through. Personal pronouns are going to be awkwardly thrown around.
You probably said that a lot. It just hit me when you said. I think you said love us. I'm just like, I wonder. It just kind of hit me there. So
yeah, because when she sees you curled up in the fetal position, crying like a little baby for 45 minutes, you're significantly different than the guy who just went to work and worked an 8-hour shift and was fine. You know, but why is it that when our daughter cries, you do that? You know.
Yeah.
So she definitely saw a distinction of person. You know, I went by different names. I changed outfits, like I was talking about earlier. Yeah. Totally different person shows up.
Yeah.
You know, totally different person who wears different outfits and goes out and puts on his body armor and is going out and stalking people in the darkness. You know, and she's like,
wow.
You just going street preaching? I'm like, yes.
Yeah, that's what you want to
tell them all about Jesus today.
They call me the priest.
I see where the pimps are hiding. Yeah, it was different.
I gotta talk to her sometime. Like,
she was a treasure.
I think having her on the show would validate a lot of you because you're an intense person. You know, I think when we first started talking, like you came out the gate firing, and I had to get my brain
an hour going ahead of time though.
I had to get my brain cooking just to keep up. You know.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming she doesn't rapid fire as fast as you.
She is a lot more cadence communicator.
Figured. But I think it'd be beneficial.
She's great to have with
for the people listening.
Yeah.
You know.
We have a lot of videos on our channel. The first
That's
video,
true, you do, yeah.
For a reason, we have 600 and something videos. We've been out here for 8 years.
Railroad.
Yeah, YouTube Nathan Reynolds. But we've been out here for 8 years. You know, like the first video on our channel is our documentary of her and I telling the story and what the experience were like with having all these assassins and occult people coming after us and realizing what it's like to have spiritual warfare and Bibles flying across your shelf. And I mean, hell opened up for us when I went out the door for my family. We experienced poltergeist and demonic warfare and astral projection and what it was like to have covens pounding down your door with blood, you know? So she's been through hell and she is stinking fierce, but she's also this just sweet little gal, you know? She's a normal person who's been married to a very different man and it has changed her forever. And she is battle hardened, but she doesn't like the spotlight or any of that, but she'll sit and talk. She's wonderfully beautiful and articulate as well.
We should arrange that. We should definitely arrange that. I think the audience, I do, because like it's a large audience. So I mean, like I think there's a lot of people that will
resonate with her more too, because they're married to freaks like me.
they listen to the show, but there's probably I know for a fact, because it's just the way the numbers game works. Like everybody thinks, oh, if I could just get on the confessionals, my show would be just as big. And it just doesn't work that way, you know. Just like I've been on Sasquatch Chronicles, my buddy's show, Wes, for several times. But my show's not even close to his size. It's just it doesn't work that way. So I think that in the same vein, when people are listening to you talk, the odds of them, there definitely will be people that go and check out your YouTube channel and stuff, right? But the odds of the majority of people, that's not happening.
I know.
And so it'd be cool to bring your wife to the table to talk to those people.
Totally.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But let's get back to what you just said, because I had to write it down frantically because you just said a bunch of stuff. I'm like, ooh, do tell. I wrote spiritual warfare, Bibles flying. Is that paired with covens showing up at the door or the assassins coming after you? But I want to hear it all. What's the best way to launch into that? I mean, like
spiritual warfare.
So spiritual warfare obviously comes in different forms, and one is assassins.
It's spiritual.
At what point did your wife start getting ingrained into this side of things? You know, like, was it before or after she started seeing who you were and your dad showed up and all that stuff?
It was after that. She was already starting to see who I was, but what really happened though is we came out of the trenches of normal Christianity. We'd been benched into non-denominational, like just go to church and take your vitamin pill, and that's basically your life. Get out of jail free card and don't really do anything effective for the kingdom. But when I came out of the closet, I was fired up and very intense. And like, we should be all in for what we believe and be absolutely consistent in what the scripture says, how we should live our life. And let's do that. And she was about it too, because she got woken up from being poisoned by a medical procedure that was required by her at the hospital and jacked her up. And she started going down all the conspiracy rabbit holes. And that's when it was like, oh, she's looking into all this stuff. We can talk about it. But at the same time, once she got pregnant, and there was like a child entering to the situation, and I started being at odds with my family, it was on so much more intensely, but more so from the spiritual side of it, the spiritual side of it. But the neighborhood, even the neighborhood we were in, is an area called Countryside out in Westminster, Colorado. And the first video on our playlist is a documentary about this child abduction and murder that took place in our neighborhood. And this was before I came out and was anything like this with her. But it started to peel back the spiritual veil to what was going on in our neighborhood. And this is what woke us up from the trench life Christian normal world that we were living in, was because there was a girl named Jessica Ridgway who was kidnapped, abducted from her walk to school out in this neighborhood. And she went missing. And there was a huge interstate, interagency, massive launch in the press to try to find this girl. And she had purple butterflies was her favorite thing. So it's a big mind control trigger out there, especially in that area. So they started pumping purple butterflies in this missing girl's image everywhere. Big billboards, Jake Javs from American Furniture Warehouse, people devoting tens of millions of dollars to this organization and to this Find Jessica campaign. So this goes on for a few days. Well, over the course of that, they've discovered her backpack. They also discovered some of the belongings that were upside down crosses engraved with satanic symbols. And they started...
On the backpack?
They started finding that they found her backpack, and later they found pieces of her. They started discovering pieces of her in different places. And so when the cross specifically was discovered, when the cross was specifically discovered, though, they brought in a satanic crimes expert. And once they brought in the satanic crimes expert, what starts to happen is this cult that operates out of our neighborhood, not part of my family, just another cult. Like I said, they're freaking everywhere. They're disgusting serpent eaters everywhere. This cult that's been operating in our neighborhood was getting investigated because satanic crimes experts understand how covens operate. And they operate under a hegemony. They have a hierarchy that's very specific, and it's very much structured in such a way to self-protect itself. And they feed themselves. They'll feed one of their underlings to the authorities anytime this stuff starts to get bad or they start to get busted. And what ended up happening is once that satanic crimes expert got brought in, they closed down the cooperation between a lot of the investigators and said that nope, we believe it's just a lone individual. It's a lone individual. It's a young male. That's who we know now as the psych profile. We're going to go find that guy. And so they end up arresting a 17-year-old who they said was kind of weird and kind of into strange stuff. And they said that this is the guy who killed her. And they closed down the investigation and threw him in jail, made him out to be a crazy little lunatic guy who had pieces of this girl in his house. And that's the end of the story. The real story, the deeper part of the story, is that her body was discovered off Highway 93 between Golden, Colorado and Boulder, is this very peculiar geological feature that's called the Devil's Backbone. And it rises up, it's kind of grassy hills. You have the Front Range, which are these giant, massive stone plateaus that are flat, these cliffs. And then it's grassy hills, and then it's this massive feature. One of those pops up again, and there's tunnels that have been bored into it all over it. And there's really strange little barns, and there's constant satanic graffiti and stuff all over this area. And it's known, even by the city workers of Arvada who do the maintenance, that there's this tunnel system that is still being used by satanic cults. They have to clean up dead animals and burnt animals and carcasses and wax candles and blood off of the entrances to these tunnels regularly. It's like a known normalcy out there. There's far more embracing of satanic cults in Boulder and in this part of the country than most of the people in the country are used to. Out there, it's a protected right of religious expression for them to sacrifice a goat and wear its head and drink its blood. Not kidding. Like it's openly done. They will wear goats' bodies and carcasses out in public in their robes. Like I'm not even kidding. They like will wear their garb out and they'll.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me.
It's disgusting.
Did you? Yeah.
Full on. Yeah. Oh, you bet. Meat suits and all the rest, bro.
Mhm.
Yeah. But this is why radical evil exists. But anyways, this tunnel system.
Is this the same tunnel system that you and your wife were exploring last time you're here? You guys were.
No,
okay.
I never took her.
I thought you brought up Devil's Backbone before. Maybe I just heard it from somewhere else recently.
No, I never took her into that.
Okay.
No, because I went out on a little trip to film with these guys who came in to hear our story, and I wanted to show them around about Jessica Ridgway.
Mhm.
Well, when we went out to Devil's Backbone, what I had not seen was where her body was physically recovered. I knew it was near this Devil's Backbone. So I took them down there to film because there's these old tunnel entrances right there that are still accessible. When we drove by there, we went to pull off of that road and we pulled into the spot where her body was found right in front of this thing. And there's this big memorial with purple butterflies all over it. You know, this memorial is set up for where her body was discovered. And I took them and showed them the entrance to this tunnel system. It's a massive, deep tunnel system that was made for mining and exploration, gas storage, and sensitive document storage. And it's been used for all the, oh yeah, dude.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
That's it's a wide variety of
Yeah, it's
of
huge.
things.
You're talking about hundreds or thousands of miles of tunnels under cities. It doesn't take long. When you go down, you get way more real estate than what's on the surface. And you get a mining company that goes in there, mining and metals and stuff, and they will dig out unbelievable amounts of earth. And they will create all this infrastructure that then once the price of gold hits a point that it's no longer valuable, or the price of uranium, whatever it is they're mining, once it changes, they're done. They're done. Well, now all that infrastructure is still there and it goes to the highest bidder. Wow. That's literally what happens. So you're going to have somebody with corporate interests like Iron Mountain. There are people that do sensitive document storage. And so they store all the secret stuff. They store everybody's secrets and they literally bury them in deep underground bases, deep underground mining tunnels that are converted to be very carefully controlled climate-wise. But then you got all these creeps that like to use the underworld to do deeds of darkness. And that's where they took her and finished her, you know? So that type of world was breaking out in our neighborhood. And that cult, my wife and I started walking around and identifying the players. We started walking around and going
through like spiritual eyes, or
praying and discernment on one side. And then there's a lot of markers. We started finding, we called him the Warlock of Countryside. That's where it started. This guy his name was Bill. You betcha. I'll name you. His name was Bill. He lived in Countryside, and he went from being a normal kind of dude, grandpa-ish age guy, chemical engineer, very smart industrial chemical engineer who used to work out there. There's a lot of energy production facilities. He was a chemical engineer out there, made a ton of stinking money. Well, anyways, he got into retirement age and decided to dabble in the occult and started taking a whole bunch of hallucinogenic drugs and channeling spirits. And so this all came out because him and I had a lot of conversations in his house. I began to do what I do, which is to go ahead and find my way in their front door. You betcha.
Yeah.
Hi. So we had a lot of that conversation. Yeah. Anyways, a whole other thing. But Bill became very publicly known in our neighborhood because he started setting up all these statues and idols, massive, huge ones with portals and tunnels. His house is very obviously visible as everybody drives in and out of this elementary school. He's right next to the elementary school. And he started setting up these statues of angels having relations with people, women, children.
Out in the open?
Big, giant, publicly obvious freak show fest going on over there. Serpents and dragons, massive checkerboard floor in his garage, all checkerboard floors with a pyramid of skulls. And at the top of the pyramid of skulls was a dragon mixed with a man. Oh, yeah. Like in his house, when I ended up going into his house and he took me on a tour of it.
How long did it take for him to get comfortable to do that with you?
A day.
A day? Man, you're good. Or is he dumb?
I was better. No, he's easy to manipulate. You know, and I did not go until I believed I had peace from the Most High to go, and that I would have His favor to get in there, because you're messing with super powerful other entities that have a lot to lose. These cults have a lot to lose, and they don't want to lose anybody, you know. But either way, I told him I was really interested in all of his very unique architecture and what he's done with the place. Like, I just am so blown away at all that you've done out here, this landscaping and these sculptures. Could you just tell me more about it? And he couldn't have been more proud to show it off. Wow. He's like, you know, some of these people around here really don't appreciate what I've been doing with the place. And they're complaining, they're issuing complaints with me. And
don't they know I'm summoning our god Lucifer?
Dude, he was so proud.
Jeez.
He was so proud. Well, he
Wow.
was excited. And you know why? Because this is why I was talking about Holy Spirit discernment, man. It says the word of Elohim is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing through to the bone and the marrow, is the discerner of the thoughts and the intentions of the hearts of man. All creatures are laid bare before its sight. That's a real thing. That means that if you understand the word and you walk in the authority and the anointing of the Most High, like you can read people's mail. You can understand their deepest intentions and they will confess with their own lips exactly what's going on there. Like the real polygraph machine is not the thing that sits on the table when you have to do a polygraph with the FBI. The real polygraph machine is the man who asks you the questions. Men and women under the anointing can understand everything that's truly going on in there. There ain't no lying before the King of Kings. Not one tongue's going to lie to him. Understand that. So I went into that guy's house. He invited me in through the garage, and he was most proud of that area first and foremost. And it had children being piddled with angels all over. Boldly so. He had black and white checkerboard floors and devices to facilitate that in his garage openly. He opened his garage to the whole neighborhood. Nobody cares.
Devices to facilitate.
Chains and beds. That stuff. Cameras. That stuff.
Right in the garage.
Dang right. Because hiding in plain sight is how these perverts operate. Because they preconditioned our neighborhood to never see anything and be stupid. You brainwash all of the best resistance fighters to be incompetent idiots who just go about their day and think none of this stuff that they talk about passing their children through the fires of Moloch happens anymore. And they literally can't see it. The best place to hide things is plain sight. That's literally this book right here. Hopefully we'll get into it. Hidden in plain sight. I have that phrase all throughout my book as a breadcrumb to find out a bunch of where these creep fests are. But this is where people forever have been engraving all over our country, all over our things, ancient languages that because here in the Americas, they were going back and forth worshiping all these different gods and deities, and they put it out there all the time. And this lady began to go ahead and map it, and then she was going from America over to Europe and over to Egypt, showing how these are the same people worshiping the same Canaanite gods, the same Egyptian gods as they have in the old days. And there's people who still worship Baal Hadad, and there's still people that worship Moloch, and they absolutely, certainly still pass their children through the fires in rituals to do it. That's why they're there and you're not. Because they're so deeply compromised, they're willing to sell their children into horrible abominations. That guy, Bill, was 100% proud of it. He invited me into his house and he told me that once he started doing all this, he said once he started listening to the spirits, he said they began to give him ideas that he's been making money from. He told me it's been the greatest thing that's ever happened to me in my life. He says, I have so much money. I have so much money. Anything I want now, I can finally buy. So money was the root of that evil for him. And he literally said, I wanted enough money that I could do anything I want the rest of my life. And they gave me ideas. They gave him technology. They gave him a ways of plugging in electrical fans and turning them on. They gave him all these things that he began to sell and gimmick around online and how to play in lotteries and gambling and make money through all this stuff. He started having so much cash flow that he was financing buying of all these ancient sculptures and all of these artifacts and stuff. The other side, being totally possessed, is now facilitating all this horrible evil and occultic because he's given over to a dark mind. He cannot even understand and reason it. He took me inside and showed me that he had on his laptop, his favorite thing to do was to sleep with other men's wives, and the app and the website that he used to do that, to facilitate that from in his house. Like he had this big sauna in the studio, all in his basement. You know, people will tell you anything. You'd be shocked at what people will show you if you ask and if you show some interest.
Is he the one that killed the little girl?
I can't say that for certain, but I know other men's DNA was recovered on her body that they never disclosed to the public. And that, they buried all that stuff. It's what the problem is, you're dealing with a bunch of Satanists that are in the judicial committees, like the judges, the magistrates, the police officers, the investigators for murder and crimes, the special victims units, perverts, unfortunately, very deeply compromised, well-placed sleeper cells. You understand? So they cover that stuff up when somebody walks in with a ring and sets it on their table and says, this one's ours. You'll let it die now. And that's what they do, you know? But there was another house just up the road. And that's the house where we believe that the vast majority of the actual trafficking and programming and abuse was happening at. Because when you pulled up to this big house, it was right on a hillside, maybe went up 80 feet directly into this hillside. Big house, beautiful home. This is all in front of a nice lake. It's a real nice, fancy, upper middle class neighborhood. And as you pull up into this house, you have a cage that greets you from the road. A literal cage, like an apiary, which you'd have for birds. A big metal cage with patterned butterflies going inside, different colors and shapes and orientations and heights, into a structure that's built into the hillside. That's a walled, locked door that goes in there. A literal cage for when somebody gets out, they walk through that thing and they go inside to that tunnel system. And that house was initially being investigated at the early part of the meeting, but we would see cars coming and going there all the time. I ended up starting to set up surveillance systems, hardline surveillance systems, because we saw it down the road. We started seeing flash drives being exchanged in people's mailboxes. We started trying to bust this ring, but we were building documentation of it. Meanwhile, Chelsea is still coming. So that's Chelsea's introduction to crazy spiritual stuff. And a lot of people in our neighborhood and in Colorado are watching this. We're traumatized by Jessica Ridgway stuff, terrified. Because here's this little elementary girl getting butchered and torn apart in pieces. And they're like, don't worry, it's just this one guy. It'll be fine. But they're freaked. They're freaked, and it changed people's paradigms rapidly. But then, even in the course of that investigation, oh, dude, it was so bad. We obviously became people that were going against this, and we're starting to investigate it. And we began to be targeted by this cult, not related to my family, not a part of my family in the same way, just people that serve a different dark prince. And they began to make our lives hell. And that's where a lot of astral projection began to come in, where you would feel these icy shadow presence come in, and they do not leave in the name of Jesus. They don't obey the normal spiritual. They're not demonic. They have free will. They're their own entity. You can't just command them out in the same way, right? But no matter, we were starting to learn, we were cutting our teeth on hard spiritual warfare 101, reading Psalm 91 out loud at night, starting to learn what it meant to walk in the authority of the Messiah. We were rooks in a really, really vicious war. And that's when they started dropping chunks of flesh and other things into our yard to defile the spiritual protection that we had. Really? Oh, dude. We used to have this composting ball that was around, these big plastic balls that you can throw all your compost in and push it around your yard. I opened it up one day because it smelled like rotting human flesh. And there was a gigantic chunk of fat that came off of the abdomen of a person.
Really?
In our compost. And then but before that, we had been having horrible spiritual attacks where our fan and our ceiling light were turning on and spinning around like crazy, and this horrible, disgusting, awful, nauseous feeling and sleep paralysis, stuff that wouldn't go away. And so we start asking the Father to please let anything hidden be revealed. Please reveal to us if there's a door that's open in our lives. Is it anything that we brought into our house that's from these people? Is there anything that we have that's causing us to sin? That's creating a legal right for the enemy to come in here and smash us, And then it would literally, while we're praying, it's like, go check the compost. Go out there and you check the compost and you're like, holy crap. This is what's desecrating the ground to give them the ability to enter in spiritually through the hedge. So breaches the door.
So that the flesh is
unclean.
And that affects you on your end?
It allows, listen, it's all a legal hierarchy in the spiritual realm. And this is why you got to understand the reason the scripture is written the way it is, as from Genesis to Revelation, and he's got words in there that say do this and don't do this, is because if you do these things, you live by them. If you don't do these things, you die, And he's part of the legal right that the adversary has in the spiritual realm is to execute justice against people that transgress the law, the instructions, the Torah, that sin. When they sin, the enemy has grounds to execute punishment against them. When they're walking in purity and holiness, they can't. This is Job chapter 1, fundamentals, where Yah's sitting there in the throne room, calls Satan in, and it's tell me what's going on out there. Why don't you give me a report on everything? And he's I've been going down, up and down in the earth. We talked about this last time, up and down, walking it down and going back and forth in it. And he's have you considered my servant Job? He's blameless, right? Blameless means innocent. He's an upright man. And he's the only reason he's like that is because you set a hedge of protection around him. No one can touch him. That hedge of protection is critical to understand spiritual warfare. That hedge of protection is governed by the King of Kings. That is an absolute reality. And if he says so, that thing comes down. If he says so, he can let something in. But at the same time, if we personally go in and start doing all the things he said don't do, and we start breaking down that hedge of protection personally by our choices, sinning, breaking, that's how that wall begins to get taken down. So the enemy has designed a system today to incentivize sinning, to make it better and more socially accepted and loved to embrace sin, to embrace lawlessness, to embrace rebellion, to embrace abnormality, to embrace perversion. By doing that, he's breaking down the hedges of protection that used to be in an area where there was biblical morality was more normalized. It was a lot harder for the enemy to get a lot of shots in on people's lives when they were in upright standing, when they were righteous men and women. But now we got a bunch of us who don't even realize what the scripture said because we don't read it for ourselves. We go to church on Sunday and we're like, praise God. No idea what it says to do in there. No idea why our children are depressed and we have divorce at the same rates and pornography addictions at the same rates of the general populations. Like we are a bunch of wounded warriors getting our lunch eaten by a much better adversary because we don't know what the rules of engagement are. We don't know how to stand in our authority and rebuke the enemy and take back the gates of darkness. Like we are supposed to take the enemy's territory back. We're not supposed to sit idly by and just wait for that rapture. We're going to get out of here. It's going to be great. We don't got to just hang out until we get out of here. Like, no, we are made for war.
Death itself is enemy, right? Mm-hmm. So I was reading in John, is it 11, where it's the story of Lazarus? I think it's John 11 or 12. But I was confused when I first read it about how, so Jesus goes to Judea where Lazarus has already been dead, and Martha and Mary come out, or no, I think Mary stayed with the body or near the gravesite, and Martha came out. But this interaction happens where Jesus is being informed, and it's, the famous verse, and Jesus wept, right? But in there, it also says twice that Jesus was filled with rage. He was angry. And I'm like, why is he angry at them? Like, what is it that they did or said to him that made him so angry? And I started reading more into it, and I think he was angry not at them, but at death itself being the enemy. Death is literally probably the last enemy of man. That's right. To be encountered. It was never meant to happen, and I think in the middle of his weeping and feeling their pain, he also felt the rage towards the final enemy. And obviously, we know how that story ended. He raises Lazarus, and he's like, "Hey, suckers! I'm here." You know what I mean? He didn't say suckers, but that's Tony's. That's Tonyism. Yeah, that's the Tonyism. But yeah, I think I don't know how I got on that. I don't know where that came from. Mm-hmm. What were we talking about?
Understanding death is the ultimate enemy.
It is the ultimate enemy. So there you go.
That was great.
I had a point though. It wasn't to tell a Bible story. I forget what the point was, but it's gone now. So, anyways, so I want to talk more about this though with your wife and all this stuff. Now, we went into a deep story here with Colorado and that whole thing with that guy, and I guess you can't prove that he was
the killer
involved, but you did uncover in the process of the investigation. You at least uncovered another aspect of the neighborhood that was unknown at that point. Started pulling the sheets off the eyes, kind of thing, with you and your wife, especially your wife, probably. Now, at what point with her is she being faced with other things that she recognizes, assassin type situations? Has she personally been experienced to that kind of thing? I know you mentioned last time you were here about I think a guy in Mexican in North Carolina that his family, or there was a family in North Carolina or something that had been taken out and killed by, I guess, assassins. I don't know if I'm recalling that right, but has your wife been, experienced anything like that where legit assassins had come for you?
Well, yeah, we talk about it in a chapter of our book called Murder in Our Minds. And she was 7 months pregnant. That's when things kicked off really bad the summer 8 years ago, because while she was pregnant, in my family, my grandfather, Zarnowski, receives the next child at their birth. He physically is the first man's hands to touch the child. That's a big thing. We weren't having none of that at all. And I had become very adversarial to my family. And Chelsea had seen and witnessed enough creep fest stuff from him. And then she got to see all my family's response to how I was coming out and talking about this stuff was very indicative of the fact that they were still very active in child exploitation. And they had very much financial fiduciary interest to keep it quiet and didn't want me speaking out, but they just wanted to compartmentalize me and shut me up. What ended up happening though is I made a phone call to my mom. It's the last call I ever had with her, asking for my heraldry and my genealogical records. She had spent a tremendous amount of time and money back in 2002 going through a proofing process to make if someone who comes from like a dynastic line of kings wants to make an appeal towards chiefdom or towards their divine right to rule, you have to physically get a heraldry done. And that's extremely expensive. DNA and Ancestry.com, it's a farce. It's a complete farce what most people are getting back. You can send in the DNA of your dog. You're going to get your ancestral heraldry of Irish, Scottish, and the other 6 other things. I'm dead serious, dude. It's a nightmare. It's not real. Okay. It's a game. It's a good way to market to find the true bloodlines and to target gene warfare and to begin to engineer viruses to kill certain people and protect others. It's a bad thing. She spent all this money going to the family heraldists. These are people that physically keep the records books of these bloodlines and can prove whether or not you have any rights to any of the inheritances, to the estates or anything or not. When I asked her to give me that, she became very, very different. Very, very different person. And when I got it, she said she was going to send it over to me and give it to me. That the next week, right after that phone call, my wife and I went out to a movie theater to go we went out and watch a movie. It was an Alex Jones movie. I'm totally serious. I gotta say it.
It was in theaters?
It was totally in theaters. It was some, I don't know, I don't even recall what it really was, but it was a last showing of the night and it was a super, exposed. We were nervous just at the baseline even then, like all the time, but we were going to see this movie and I was really trying to get her. I was trying to get her to understand the other world still. Yeah. She had a lot of working framework of how this stuff operated, but she didn't have XP. She didn't have the experience points to have any deep resonation of understanding that, but I put on my body armor. I put on my pistols and my blades and everything else, my trauma kit. Every time I was going out the house then, even in the house, I was full battle rattle, We go to the last showing of that theater. And as we're walking out of the theater, there is nobody besides us. There's a handful of cars, a couple of cars right towards, we go out the side entrance, in and out all the other ways. We go out the side entrance and there's a couple employees' cars for certain. The guys who park there and they leave, they go there. There's another car. Ours is parked way out because I always like to be super far out and in a pull-through spot. You know what I'm talking about. You guys have OPSEC. I'm parked way out there and I see one car at the very far distant part of the parking lot. And then as we start to exit the building, another car starts to come from the right side. And this is like another entrance. And they start to make their way towards us, just driving straight through all the lanes. It's like 11:30 at night.
That's suspicious.
And they're coming straight at us. And there's a man and a woman that I can see. A man driving, woman in the passenger seat. As they start to come closer, I have that overwhelming spiritual hedge of intent to kill. It's like, this is why I say it's a spiritual war, because they're possessed. People are possessed. They may not even intentionally be it. They may not try to be occultists and all the rest of it. But when you go to murder somebody, when you go to kill somebody, there are spiritual antennas that pop up. And they did. And Chelsea was clued in on them and felt sick. Something's wrong there. They're coming at us like that. And in my head, it's just like, get her to the car. Get her out of here. Because I am always used to fighting alone. I like to clear the room of all innocence before I fight. I'm a bullet magnet. I like the bullets coming at me. I want all of them. I don't want any collateral, and I grab her hand and start trying to push her down below the first car's engine block. And as this car starts to come towards us, the woman raises a pistol to try to point it at us. And as she begins to point it and fire, nothing happens. She misfires. And so she pulls it back into the vehicle and tries to clear it. And I just grab Chelsea and we start running towards our vehicle. And as the vehicle gets past us like this, I can see clear as day she's got a stinking pistol that she is trying to unjam. And she screams at him, just go, 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 go. And they drive past us and beyond us. And I'm just beelining it for our forerunner. Like you said, you got to get to the truck gun. I heard you earlier. For what it's worth. Tony's
What
got
truck gun?
You can edit that out.
You mean truck guns?
Yeah, truck guns. Yeah, but there's the arsenal, right? But we get in this forerunner. So we had at the time, my bug out vehicle of choice. We get in the forerunner and we start that thing up. And there's this truck that was sitting in the parking lot idle turns on his lights, and two guys in the back seat pop up. Well, sorry, one in the truck bed pops up with a rifle and begins to point that at us as the truck comes closer to us. He aims to fire that thing, and he can't fire either. His weapon jams, and her and I, meanwhile, are praying out loud. Father, please protect us. Send your mighty angels to block them and jam their weapons. Confusion to the enemy's camp. Please protect us. We rely on you. Like, nowhere during the course of this event did I feel the clearance to engage in a gunfight. Because rule number one is, what are you going to deal with the post-press propaganda after the fact? You're going to still have to deal with a jury that's going to try all of this situation. And you better make sure you're 100% the victim, 100% scared for your life.
Absolutely.
Every single time. If you are an armed defender and you carry legally, you better be certain that you have the law on your side 100% from beginning to end of any armed encounter. And I didn't yet. Even if I had them pointing a gun at me, it's not until rounds are fired that I have a super easy win case, So either way, I turn the car on, the truck keeps going and pulls off the other direction. We peel off going back the same way that the original assassins came in. As we go to leave the parking lot, a man comes running across the road in front of us, all black clothes with a pistol in his hand that looked just like a Glock. And he looks over at us to get in our way and get in front of us. And there is a fear and a terror in his eyes, like he was staring at something so horrifying. And he looked at us with just dread and ran. Did not raise his pistol, did not fire. And I am 100% certain that the King of Kings can send his warring angels to defend and to protect you. And he can put the dread of you on your enemies. When we are not walking ways that are pleasing before him, the curse is that the fear of our enemies is on us. We are not supposed to be the people ruled by fear. We are supposed to be the people that are ruled by covenant and understanding our Father's got our back. And you come against us like that little scrawny David guy understood covenant. He understood whose he was. And that's why when all the other people of Israel, all the warriors, the best grunts in the army were terrified because they didn't understand their authority. They didn't understand the righteous king of Israel had every one of his sons' backs. Anybody could have killed Goliath with a stick. David was the only one who had courage and faith and conviction enough to understand his identity. And he walked boldly in there. You don't need all the guns to fight the war. All you need is obedience and authority and conviction and calling. If the Father calls you, you go. You obey him, he'll take care of everything you ever need and beyond ways that you could never even hope for, because then he gets the glory. You know what I don't have is a laundry list of all the guys I shot and killed and defended my family from. And you know what? My wife is thankful for that. I have children because of that know their father, and I'm not in prison somewhere because I killed some guy who turned out was a police detective. Even though he was dirty, still a cop. There's complications of factors when you deal with these types of people and they have the law on their side and they just go in and start killing you and they lie about it later, So I am blessed beyond measure to have gotten to see my Father provide protection and deliver us many times for us. And my wife has been there along the way. And she shares these stories. Like I said, we have lots of videos of her talking about these events, but I would love for her to be able to be here so you guys can understand, even for people that don't come from the world that I come from, we have seen miraculous protection and provision in so many ways, even though she wasn't classically trained as a fighter and all. She didn't need that. She's someone who has way more faith than I do. She has way more faith than I do. She really does. She is a woman who has great faith, and she has a simple love, like a childlike love for her Father in heaven. And because of that, she's got to see miracles every day.
What you described there reminded me, and I've talked about this on my show before, but my grandfather, he did evangelism long time ago. He's passed now. But he told me so many stories on his deathbed. But one of the ones that always stick out is he said that they went to a town. It was back in the day when they did the big tent revivals, and they went to a town that they weren't welcome in. They set up in a field. They had their whole service. Say it was a Saturday. And they had gotten word that there was a group of people who were planning on coming into their camp that night and just tearing down the stage, the tent, all that stuff. And so that night, my pappy and several other men just stayed back at the tent, just kind of making sure everything stayed cool. And he said, sure enough, there was this long driveway out into the field, and there's this car that came down and stopped at a certain point and just idled there with its headlights on. And he said, then it backed up and pulled out. And he said a little bit later, that car came back with a couple more cars. Same thing. They got to a certain point, they stopped, idled, backed out, left. And I think even the third time they came back in with even more cars. And it's just like, what are these guys going to do? I think he even said, I can almost hear him saying, what are these clowns going to do? Are they going to do something or what? He said they left and they didn't come back. And the next day they go into town to get supplies, food and stuff. And he said, again, I can hear him saying this. He said, it must have been the talk of the town. He said that people were talking about how that night those guys had every intention to come in, destroy the place, maybe even light it on fire. They were going to destroy it. And he said every time they came down that driveway, apparently there were angels standing there guarding the facility that they had put up. And my grandfather never saw him. He said, but those men in the car, they saw it and they were terrified of it. Mm-hmm. And it was enough for them to not go any further past a very specific certain point. And so what you were talking about, how that guy had the terror on his face and he saw something you didn't see, but he saw something that terrified him. You're really marrying two different worlds here, really incredibly. The reality of physical warfare and spiritual warfare and how they do intertwine. I've often for years talked about how the higher up you go in these conspiracy realms, the more supernatural it becomes, because the higher up you go, the more they are very aware of the supernatural element of what they're doing, and it becomes more satanic and it becomes more evil and filled with people who embrace that. And I think what you're doing is you're marrying those two worlds beautifully, where you're taking a very real physical situation and you implemented spiritual warfare, and you're seeing spiritual warfare interceding and manipulating the physical. There's no way that two guns from two different vehicles are supposed to malfunction. And then the third last option of a guy like a deer running out in the middle of the road, all he has to do is raise a gun and fire at the car that's coming towards him, and he just has a terrified look on his face. That's not realistic. But what you're describing is very real when you put in the supernatural aspects to it. The reality that we are people who have the weapon, the nuke in our back pocket that is readily accessible to us if we believe it. Faith of a mustard seed. And I think that's an incredible story to share, to show the reality of how powerful our God is and what he is capable and willing to do. And your perspective of David and Goliath is fascinating too, because I'm not sure if I ever really thought of it that way, but I think there's no reason to believe that's not true. That I think there's a lot of prophetic things about David's life, all that, right? But when it comes down to the brass tacks of the situation, you're right. I think any soldier could have gone out of that field and killed Goliath if they had just had the faith that David had in that moment. I think it's a fascinating way to look at it, because it really is like anybody listening right now. Yes, you are just as special in God's eye as David was. You are a child of the King.
That's right.
It's wild. It's wild.
And he can give that supernatural insight to read anybody's mail, no matter how good of a sneaky, dark, whatever they are. There's nothing that competes with the power of the King of Kings. You know,
Yeah.
like Yeshua, like I came to know him as, I say Yeshua now, and I say Yahuwah now. So there's specificity of terms, because Jesus was used in horrible ways in my life. I've seen people do things in the name of God that were evil. And I got to know him better by having a little more specific terms, because I had to deal with a lot of Satanists and a lot of witches and a lot of New Age practitioners of Kundalini garbage Gnostic Jesus all over in Boulder and the places that we were living. And we had to learn quickly that there is an important distinction of terms between who the actual Son of God is versus the one that's being masqueraded to the masses as what he is, this all-embracing, lawless one. There is a reason there's truth, absolute truths. And there's a reason there is a war against it. And there always has been. And there always will be until the literal author of truth shows up and puts all things to rest and go ahead. And the last enemy that's defeated and thrown into that lake of fire is death. Mm-hmm. And that is a great, awesome, splendid moment. That hell, Sheol, that lake of everlasting, the lake of fire was created for the devil and his messengers, his angels, and death goes with them. The beast goes with them. And there's a very serious, actual, practical application of walking in that today and why it's important to walk in his ways and to guard his commands. By these words we live. It's literally what's on these blades. I put that as, this is from a guy. I went out and did a master smithing class with a guy named MT Knives, Patrick Rorman. This is one of his knives. It's called the Talon that he made. And he had a laser etcher. And I always had this dream of making knives and swords and putting the entirety of the scriptures on there. Because at the end of the day, when I said Hebrews chapter 4 and about the word being living and active, that's a serious thing. That, when I picked this one up, all these other books that are on the table over here, they're interesting. They're fantastic. I love reading them. This is The Gospel to Every Creature. What did Jesus mean, The Gospel to Every Creature by John Darnell? This is an incredible book that preaches the gospel to a bunch of things and people that think they're not people anymore and invaluable in my life. This one has an everlasting consequence about the mortality and the fruition of people's eternal souls. Critically important, their spirit, right? This one talks about ancient history, and I enjoy that stuff. And I love trying to decipher what the lost reality of our society is. But you know what? This one is living.
Yeah.
And that's distinct. That's set apart. That the word we get, the churchianity word is holy. Set apart, set apart, set apart is Yahweh Elohim Almighty, who was and is to come. That's what the seraphim are flying around saying over his throne continually. He is other than us. He is entirely distinct from who we are and all the horrible, evil atrocities. That otherness, set apartness is the power of righteousness. That's the power and the dominion and the glory and the majesty and the awesome splendor of him. But you know what? The fallen ones, they've embraced iniquity, which is sinning and transgressing the law, the Torah, and then continuing to walk that out in rebellion to produce transgression. From transgression, if you continue to sear that conscience and embrace that evil, that's iniquity. And that's its own force. That is the force. They're trying to propagandize and weaponize the force from Freemasonic and Kabbalistic Babylonian magicians. That iniquity force is lawlessness. That's the embracing of the lawless one, that you do what thou own will shall be the whole of the law. That's the satanic Bible filth. But they're trying to brand Jesus as that character to people. He sets you free from everything. You do whatever you want now, honey. You be you. The heart is good. It's the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I'm this has a contradictory message to the vast majority of the changing tides of public opinion. This is an absolute statement. Those are unpopular these days. But you know what? They've never been popular. There is a broad way that leads to destruction, and there's a narrow path that leads to life, and few are they that find it. But I try to challenge people and encourage them. Listen, read it for yourself from Genesis to Revelation before you render an opinion on what it says and whether or not you want to be somebody that's called after his name. Because there's consequences if you go and say I do this in Jesus' name, and you're not doing anything related to him, bro. There's a lot of people that he's going to say, get away from me. I never knew you. Scary stuff.
Very.
I put these words on these blades to remind me that I'm not my own. I'm in a covenant with my wife. So I had to surrender my knives to the King of Kings. I literally had to take blade, and give him over to him and say, that's yours. I am not my own anymore. I trust that if you ever need the warrior, you know where to find me. But until that day, I surrender my sovereignty to you. I took my finally well-earned sovereignty, self-sovereignty. I finally had freedom to be my own man. And I went and laid it at his feet because I understood fundamentally I was bought at a price. I was bought and ransomed out of bondage and slavery. And I was beaten and bloody and ruined. I was a ragged heap of a man by the time they got done with me. But you know what? He has rebuilt me, and he has taken me on a journey to trust him for my healing that's transformed my life. And he's giving me an inheritance that was pure and not filled with blood and betrayal. My children are my inheritance. Children are an inheritance. The fruit of the womb is my reward. Like arrows in the hand of a mighty man are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He will not be ashamed when he stands in the gates. He will not be turned back by his enemies. That principle, I don't have riches in carnal sense whatsoever. I've lived like a migrant worker for my wages. But you know what I have? My family. My children are sincerely them. My daughter is 8 years old today. My daughter's 8 years old. I wrote this book, a chapter in there called A Letter to My Daughter, because I thought I would die. I thought those would be the last words I ever said to her. I tried to write a book so that she could read it because Dad's dead. I thought I would be dead a long time ago. I did not think we'd make it this far. I wrote that book for her. I wrote that book for all the little girls that are out there that didn't have a dad that did the right thing and said no. I wrote this book and told my story to try to set those captives free. That there is freedom in confession. And he said in here, I got to confess my sins to one another to be healed. That's why I'm out here telling the things I don't want to talk about. But I've seen that when I do, I set others free. And sometimes the freedom's not for us, it's for them. Mm-hmm. And we set those captives free so that they don't have to live in the closets of cowardice anymore and compromise. We need a massive confession of sins in this country, a massive falling on our face of deep repentance and putting on sackcloth and ashes and mourning for the horrible evil we have done. Each of us individually and collectively, corporately. That's the only thing that'll save this country. It's not some political messiah. The Messiah already came, son, and he calls you to obedience and submission to him. And when you do, bro, he'll make your enemies be at peace with you. He says, when a man's ways are pleasing before him, he'll make even his enemies to be at peace with him. I have got to sit down in the presence of my enemies and break bread with them, and no, I did not kill them afterwards. I had the final fruit of the Spirit is self-control, and I've learned a strong thing about it. When my Father in heaven says, shh, I shut my mouth. When he says, put the blade away, son, put the blade away. And I've learned that he can deal with my enemies how he sees fit. And you know what? The pits that these monsters are digging for all of us corporately, all the horrible, evil agendas of what they're doing, the pits they're digging, they're going to fall in them. The snares that they set for our necks, they're going to fall into them and they will be caught up by them and consumed by them. You know what? But that comes through prayer and intercession and aligning our lives with what he said to do. And so on my blade, it says right on here, guard the commandments of Yahuwah your Elohim, to walk in his ways and revere him. Deuteronomy 8:6. If we do not have the fear of the Most High, we will fear every man, we will fear every emotion, we will fear the changing winds of public opinion and what other people think of us. But when we put to death our mortal enemy, which is fear, and we surrender to him and we realize, no, the world trembles at his rebuke. When you start to read 2 Samuel 22, bro, I'm going to read it. Let's freaking send it. This is over the horizon, artillery just coming in, sink that thing deep. 2 Samuel 22. This is what David understood that all those other guys didn't. This is why David was who he was and those other men weren't. This is why David was the commander of the Gibborim. Then David spoke to Yahuwah the words of this song on the day when Yahuwah had delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Shaul. And he said, Yahuwah is my rock and my stronghold and my deliverer. My Elohim is my rock. I take refuge in him, my shield and the horn of my deliverance, my high tower and my refuge, my Savior. You save me from violence. I call on Yahuwah, the one to be praised, and I am saved from my enemies. For the waves of death surrounded me. Floods of Belial made me afraid. The cords of Sheol were all around me. The snares of death were before me. In my distress, I called upon Yahuwah, and to my Elohim I cried, and from his call he heard my voice, and my cry was in his ears. And the earth shook and trembled. The foundations of the heavens were troubled because he was wroth. Smoke went up from his nostrils and devouring fire from his mouth. Coals were kindled by it. And he bowed the heavens and came down, and thick darkness was under his feet. And he rode upon a cherub and flew, and was seen upon the wings of the wind. And he put darkness around him as booths, darkness of waters, thick clouds. From the brightness before him, coals of fire were kindled. Yahuwah thundered from the heavens, and the voice of the Most High sent forth his voice. And he sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning and confused them. And the channels of the sea were seen, the foundations of the world were uncovered. At the rebuke of Yahuwah, at the blast of the breath of his nostrils, he sent from above. He took me, he drew me out of many waters. He delivered me from my strong enemy, from those hating me, for they were stronger than I. They comforted me in the day of my calamity. But Yahuwah was my support, and he brought me out into a large place. He delivered me, for he delighted in me. Yahuwah rewarded me according to my righteousness. According to the cleanness of my hands, he repaid me. For I have guarded the ways of Yahuwah and have not acted wrongly against my Elohim. For all his right rulings are before me as his laws. I do not turn from them, and I am perfect before him. And I guard myself from my crookedness. And Yahuwah repays me according to my righteousness, according to my cleanness before his eyes. With the lovingly committed ones, you show yourself lovingly committed. With the perfect one, you show yourself perfect. With the clean, you show yourself clean. And with the crooked, you show yourself twisted. For you save the humble people, but your eyes are on the haughty to bring them low. For you are my lamp, O Yahuwah, and Yahuwah makes my darkness light. For with you I run against a band. With my Elohim I leap over a wall. The El, his way is perfect. The word of Yahuwah is proven. He is a shield to all who take refuge in him. For who is El besides Yahuwah? Who is rock besides our Elohim? El is my mighty stronghold, and he makes my way perfect, making my feet like the feet of a deer, and sets me on high places, teaching my hands for battle, so that my arms bend a bow of bronze. You give me the shield of your deliverance, and your lowliness makes me great. You enlarge my steps under me so that my feet shall not slip. I pursue my enemies and destroy them, and I do not turn back till they are destroyed. And I destroy them and crush them so that they do not rise and fall under my feet. And you gird me with strength for battle. You cause my adversaries to bow under me, and you make my enemies turn their backs. Those hating me, I cut them off. They look, but there's no Savior until Yahuwah, but he shall not answer them. I will beat them as dust of the earth. I beat them small as dirt in the streets. I spread them out. And you deliver me from the strivings of my people. You safeguard me as the head of the nations. A people I have not known serve me. Sons of the foreigner submit to me. And as soon as they hear my voice, they obey me. Sons of the foreigner fade away and gird themselves from their strongholds. Yahuwah lives, and blessed is my rock, and exalted is my Elohim, the rock of my deliverance. El, who gives vengeance to me, and bringing peoples down under me, and bringing me out from my enemies. You raise me up above those rising against me. You deliver me from a man of violence. Therefore I give thanks to you, O Yahuwah, among nations. I sing praise to your name. A tower of deliverance is he to his sovereign, and showing loving commitment to his anointed, to David and his seed forever. That's the weapons of our warfare. The understanding of his identity is why he slaughtered Goliath with his own sword. David never needed a sword to fight Goliath. The sword was already in his mouth. He cursed them by their gods. David said, because you curse my Elohim, I'll take the head off of your body and feed your flesh to the birds. That was back then. This is David after it's all said and done, giving a report about what he's witnessed and seen because of who his daddy was. When men walk in an understanding of humility and submit to the ways of the Most High, unstoppable force of mighty men of valor, Gibborim, rise up. And that's what we need here. We don't need one man to rise above us all. We need us to co-labor with each other in the trenches and get down in the gutters and bleed with each other and cry with each other and weep with each other and wail with each other and be loving to each other. That's how we defeat the enemy.